This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. If I'd known it was live on Global Player, I might have worn a jacket. But here we are, your monthly opportunity to speak directly to the Mayor of London, although obviously I also avail myself of the opportunity to ask him a couple of questions as well. And we find ourselves this morning, Sadiq Khan, in, not for the first time, but possibly in the most febrile of circumstances, talking about you being in the news for reasons that have next to nothing to do with you. What did you feel, if you don't mind me asking that question, when you heard what Lee Anderson said about you being essentially enthralled to Islamists and extremists?
Well, good morning. I've had a number of emotions over the last 6 days. Sad, angry, frustrated, appalled, heartbroken. A lot of different emotions. It's not about me. Listen,
it is a bit. I take your point, but I do want to talk about you for a bit first, because those are words I haven't heard you use before. What made this occasion different? Because I sit here every month and read absolute filth coming into this studio about you and directed at you. And I know that you experience similar in public spaces, which I've also experienced. Why is this one so different for you?
Well, a number of reasons. Look, firstly, park for a second. This man is a very senior Conservative. What's happened subsequently is people who I think should know better are not calling it what it is. Now, look, if somebody says this is wrong or they should apologise, I would assume it's wrong, unacceptable, and apologies being asked for is because we all accept it's racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Muslim. My sadness and my heartbreak is because people who we look to for leadership haven't provided it. And I mean Sunak, I mean the Deputy Prime Minister, I mean the Cabinet. James, I was one of the first people in real time on your show and at other places to call out anti-Semitism within my party. I've been quite clear in my views on homophobia and misogyny. Later on today, there'll be a report published which will demonstrate some of the cultural problems within our police service. Why is anti-Muslim hatred, why is Islamophobia any less serious than those things? And my sadness and my heartbreak is because I thought we'd made progress since 2016. And clearly, in some quarters, we haven't. And here's my real source of sadness. Is I spent a lot of time over the last many years in politics encouraging others to get involved in mainstream politics. Look, don't get mad, get even, join a political party, go on a lawful, peaceful, safe protest, lobby your MP, become a councillor, become a member of parliament. James, the conversations I've had over the last week from mums, dads, uncles, aunties of Muslim children or visible minorities saying, you know what, there's no way I'm going to encourage my loved one to get into politics. There is no way at all if that's how people like you are treated. And by the way, you and I often have conversations off air that many of your listeners will not know about you calling me out for saying, why don't you talk about it more, Sadiq? You're in danger of gaslighting. I'm paraphrasing what you've said in the past to me off air, and apologies for breaching confidences. Sadiq, you're in danger of gaslighting the British public into thinking everything's okay when it clearly isn't. Because I don't want to be the main character, right? I don't want to play the victim card, the race card, the Muslim card. But James, Sunak's had a million opportunities to call this out for what it is. Oliver Dowden's had a million opportunities. Every member of the Cabinet's had a million opportunities. They've not called it out for what it is. This is Islamophobic. It is racist. It is anti-Muslim. Can I explain why for those of you listeners that don't know?
Of course.
Right. There are these common conspiracy theories. There are these Islamophobic slurs. There are tropes. There are lazy untruths about all sorts of minorities. We know the ones about Jewish people. We know the ones about women. We know the ones about those from the LGBTQ plus community. The ones about Muslims are basically Muslims taking over London, the Islamification of society. The phrase Londonistan is a reflection of those conspiracy theories, sleeper cells. Well, what this man did was basically articulate in a few sentences all those tropes. It's clearly Islamophobic, it's clearly anti-Muslim, it's clearly racist. And here why I'm angry. What the Tories have done is try and deflect this by an argument about definition of Islamophobia. That's exactly what the Labour Party did about the definition of anti-Semitism in 2016, right? I accepted straight away the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Why aren't the Conservatives accepting the United Nations, the all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia? So look, I'm happy to call it anti-Muslim hatred if it gets onto the terrain of what's at the root of this, which is, a big problem in the UK, a big problem across the globe, and we should be bringing communities together, uniting communities rather than dividing them.
What do you think explains the reluctance? Because to many people listening to this, they will remember Labour MPs, very senior Labour MPs, being outspoken about anti-Semitism in their own ranks and being happy to name the people that they felt were responsible. Why do you think somebody as intelligent as Rishi Sunak and as well-versed in the challenges of diversity and persecution and racism, why do you think he and all of his colleagues have failed so signally to call it out for what it so clearly is?
Well, firstly, I think it starts from the top. The top's got to provide leadership, and Sunak is weak. He's weak. Sunak's weak. Look,
but what's he frightened of?
Well, because of the double standards. If Sunak did the right thing and called out this man for what he said and what it is, then it begs the question: what about Braverman? Begs the question: what about other members of the Conservative Party? And he's a weak leader, and I'm afraid for the next few weeks and months we'll have more of this. And here's the problem: the consequences of that is it normalises hatred against Muslims.
Is it as simple as that? If they were to put a name on what Lee Anderson has done, it would apply equally to Suella Braverman and others?
Well, I mean, it's for... Look.
Well, let me read you what she said. The truth is that the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites are in charge now. They have bullied the Labour Party, they have bullied our institutions, and now they have bullied our country into submission. Is that... I don't want to play top trumps on such a serious issue, but to you, is that worse than what Lee Anderson said?
According to Anderson, yes, because here's the if you you don't need to do this, but I'll explain to you what happened. But if you watch the actual interview that this man gave, he was saying actually Braverman went too far because it's not this. I'm paraphrasing. The Islamists aren't controlling the country, but they are London. Now, would he have said that if my faith was other than Islam? Would he have said that if my skin was other than the colour that my skin is? And here's the issue. And now there's all sorts of deflection. And by the way, James, every month I come and I can have a discussion debate about policing, about the NHS, about housing, about the ULEZ, about air quality. That's a discussion on my policies, right? Not the colour of my skin or my religion, but also where's the evidence? And here's the thing, why I'm heartbroken and sad, is it's 2024, man. We're not talking about the 1970s when my dad came in the 1960s where there were signs saying no black, no Irish, no dogs. By blacks, they meant anybody of colour. This is 2024. And this man wasn't the deputy chairman 15 years ago. He was the last deputy chairman. Suella Braverman wasn't the Home Secretary 30 years ago. She was the last Home Secretary. Liz Truss wasn't the Prime Minister 30 years ago. She was the last Prime Minister. I'm sorry. I expected better from Sunak.
If this had happened a year ago, would you have thought about running again?
Well, look, here's the thing.
I've not seen you like this before.
Here's the thing. You cannot allow bullies to win, man. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to allow myself to be bullied out of politics, right? There are people who have, I'm afraid, been scared to get into politics because of this sort of stuff in 2016, right? If we allow them to win, what does that mean? Right? That means you can't be a politician, you can't be in the cabinet, you can't be the mayor, if you're of Islamic faith. And it's, we rightly call out anti-Semitism. Rightly. It's the oldest form of hatred we know. Well, newsflash, anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia, racism is acceptable in many walks of British life.
What do you want to happen next?
Well, my concern is, James, people like you and Nick Ferrari deserves huge credit. I'm somebody who's been critical of Nick Ferrari in the past. Nick Ferrari, you, Kay Burley, please don't get bored. Please don't stop asking these questions when people come on your show who represent the Conservative Party. Because my fear is this. They've been given this memo from number 10 saying, listen, what you do is say it's wrong, say it's unacceptable, say he's lost the job because he failed to apologise. And not unreasonably, the caravan moves on. But for Muslims in this country, for people of colour in this country, it doesn't move on. Because this is our country. We love this country. We want to contribute to our country, whichever way we can, whether it's public service, whether it's the civil service, whether it's journalism, whether it's politics, and if we don't address this, that's a problem. And by the way, Luciana Berger, Ruth Smeeth, Louise Ellman, dear friends of mine, left the Houses of Commons because of anti-Semitism. They're now back, thankfully, in the Labour Party because of the strength of Keir Starmer changing our party. I want Muslims to be running towards Parliament, running towards their councils, running towards City Hall, to want to be in positions of power and influence and put their head with the parapet. And if things don't change, I fear that things go backwards, not forwards.
And finally on this issue, to those young Muslim teenagers or black teenagers or Jewish teenagers, to the people who are looking at the seas and tidal waves of hatred washing over parts of the country at the moment and thinking, do you know what, maybe I won't go into politics after all. Maybe I won't go into public life at all. What would you say to them?
There's a great phrase from one of my favourite politicians of all time. He's a fictional politician, but he said, decisions are taken by those that turn up. If we don't turn up, somebody else will. It's possible by the end of this year. We've got Donald Trump in the White House. We've got Swallow Braverman in Downing Street. And we've got Susan Hall in City Hall. Or there's an alternative world where because we got involved, because we became active, we led to a different outcome. I say to young people all the time, don't get mad, get even. Join a political party, get involved in mainstream politics, lobby your MP, lobby your councillor. Let's deal with this. Say, look at the progress made. My father came to this country, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Within one generation, this great city voted his son to be the Mayor of London. That's the progress we can make, bringing people together, unity over division, hope over fear. But James, it does feel like every day we've got to justify our existence. Every day we've got to show how much we've integrated. Every day we've got to show our loyalty to the flag and to this city. Every day somebody's, questioning us and our sense of belonging. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. And if I'm feeling this way, right, I want you to just imagine what it feels like to be, a young British person growing up in Burnley or in Birmingham or in Tower Hamlets, when you've got this sort of nonsense, racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim nonsense from a senior Conservative, and it's not called out. And it should be called out. And I think those Conservatives who have failed to call it out will live to regret this. But we must give credit to the Said of Arsis, to the Sajid Javeds, to the Nusrat Ghanis. They have called it out, but it shouldn't just be Muslims calling it out in the Tory party. Where's the allyship? Where's the allyship?
Has there not been any that you're aware of?
Well, I've received some lovely messages from Tories, right, privately, and I'm very grateful. Of course, I'm very grateful. But one of the things that I've learned in the Labour Party that we did right is calling out anti-Semitism publicly as well and demanding action being taken. And I think, we've now extended this to no-go areas. I mean, Donald Trump used the phrase no-go areas to describe London, by the way, if you remember. And now we've got a former government minister describing parts of London and types of Birmingham as no-go area. What is that code for? Now, what is that code for? And this is my point about, this is no longer subtle. This is overt. And I want everyone to have a sense of belonging in this great city and this great country, irrespective of your faith, your gender, your religion, your background. And what I would hope our Prime Minister would do and those in his cabinet is bring our communities together, recognise, without being too trite or cliche, we've got far more in common that unites us than divides us. And by the way, I say this point, both privately in a text to Sunak and publicly, I welcomed him being the Prime Minister. The fact that an ethnic minority, the fact that a religious minority could be Prime Minister says something magnificent about this country. That's why I say, I feel let down.
Why don't you text him about this?
Well, I've seen what he said publicly. It's clearly he's not going to resolve from that, and I'm not sure what would benefit from me texting him about this, because he's had not one, he's not had not two, he's not had not three, he's had 16 opportunities to take this on and deal with this. And I think what we don't want is people losing hope about the power of politics to change things. That's why I'm definitely going to, not allow this. I'm definitely not going to allow these people to, cow me and bully me.
Speaking of texts, I've already had one which proves some of your points. It simply says, in quotes, voted Islam to be the Mayor of London, end quotes. Wow. And I'd say that you misheard. What the Mayor said was that they voted his son to be the Mayor of London, talking about the generational shift from his father coming here to him becoming mayor. But I'm happy to correct and clarify that, even though I probably shouldn't need to. You know what's going to happen now, don't you? We're going to get a question about bus routes on Streatham High Street,
which is great, which is as it should be. Look, you know, there's a great, and I use this during campaigns. There's a lovely speech that John F. Kennedy gave before he became president. I'm not comparing myself to John F. Kennedy, can I just say? But for those that don't know, President Kennedy was the first ever Catholic president of the USA, which is quite remarkable. Bear in mind, it's as late as the 1960s. And JFK once went to a Catholic service and said, "Don't vote for me because I'm a Catholic. Don't vote for me because I'm a Catholic. Vote for me because I've got the best policies and I'll be the best president." And I say this genuinely, James, you know, believe me or not, I say this when I go to mosques. Don't vote because I'm Muslim. Vote for me because I've got the best vision, the best values and the best policies to be the Mayor of London. I say the same thing when I go to the temples, the synagogues, the gurdwaras, the shopping centres, the bus garages, because it's my policies, my visions and my values that I want you to be voting for, not my religion.
Should we go to the phones?
Let's go to phones. The first caller is from Red Hill and it's Adrian. Good morning, Adrian.
Good morning. How do I follow that? My eyes are a bit moist after all that. That's quite emotional. Yeah, I'm a London bus driver, and my question is, when are you going to suspend the Streatham Vale low traffic neighbourhood zone? It's taking over an hour to travel a distance that is timetabled. You know, I've seen ambulances just stuck. It's just nuts. My bus gets empty because it's quicker to walk.
I do get a lot of messages about this. It's not confined to Streatham, but it does seem to be confined to LTNs.
Adrian, firstly, I'm not sure if I've shared this with Londoners before, but I'm not sure if you know what my dad did.
Stop it.
So Adrian, listen. So I agree with you. The LTN in Streatham is causing huge problems. I saw most recently on Friday last week the average times, how long it's taken as a consequence of that LTN. So yesterday I was in touch with Lambeth Council, my team were, to see what we can do to resolve the issue. Because look, one of the reasons we have piles and trials, or it's a council LTN for those that don't know, rather than my LTN. It's a low traffic neighbourhood that the council have put in to try and see if they can improve things on local roads, but it's not working. And so we've asked the council to look at it urgently in relation to the consequences of a very well-intentioned LTN. But people like you are reporting back to us that passengers are leaving your buses because it's taking so long. So an unintended consequence is less use of public transport. So you'll get some news very soon, Adrian, about the changes that the council are going to make to that LTN. Because the evidence is, just in the first few months, it's not been great. It's not been helped, by the way, by Thames Water digging up that road at the same time as the LTN began. But it's no consolation to you stuck in your bus or your passengers leaving the bus because of the traffic.
Is that a satisfactory answer, Adrian? I mean, it's a bit of a watch this space, but I think there's clearly something substantive on the horizon, which you can't always say about the Streatham High Street bus route.
Adrian, very imminently there'll be some news in relation to this, and you won't be surprised, Adrian. You're not the first bus driver to raise this with me, but I want you to be the last one to raise it with me.
No, I know, and I mean, talking about the water, it was the waterworks. It's actually the same spot 4 times. I think they kept digging it up, and then. But this has actually got worse. Even after Christmas, it's actually getting worse. I mean, I was behind an ambulance, and my bus didn't move for 10 minutes. It was under blue lights, and it couldn't move. And you're just thinking, this is like it's policy over practical and sound judgment.
I think it's a combination of things, Adrian. But by the way, you're spotted about Thames Water. And this is another example why Thames Water is not fit for purpose and is losing money left, right and centre, because they haven't got the competency to make sure they dig up a road just once rather than again. But also, I think people have got to recognise when they've tried something and it's not working, it's had an unintended negative consequence. And I think Lambeth deserve massive credit. They're a great council, great leadership, but this particular LTN is not working. And so we're speaking to them about resolving this ASAP.
Right, well, yeah. If it hasn't been sorted by the next time you're here, we shall certainly be reminding you of that. Let's crack on. I think you've got the details.
Thanks, Adrian, for that call. The next caller is from Boreham Wood, and it's Nick. Good morning, Nick.
Yeah, hello. Good morning to you. My question as a Jewish Londoner is: when are you going to ban the hate marches so myself, family, and friends can freely go into London at the weekend without feeling intimidated and persecuted?
Nick, thanks for your call, and I'm really sorry that you're scared and frightened to come into London. The bad news is you're not the first Jewish person I've spoken to who just feels scared on Sundays of the week to come into our great city, and that can't be right. So firstly, can I just one thing? I mean, I think to call them hate marches is a bit unfair because on some of the weekends that take place, the vast majority, aren't in any way involved.
It's as if Suella Braverman is sitting in the empty chair in this studio, isn't it? Because it was her that introduced that phrase, into public discourse.
I can understand why people feel the negativity, the hatred, and so forth. But the context is, a small minority, Nick, are breaking the law, and a small minority action has been taken. I checked again this week. There have been more than 400 arrests since the awful massacre in Israel by Hamas on October the 7th. A lot of that is to do with hate crime. So what the police are doing is, Nick, speaking to organisers of the marches to make sure they stay in some certain parts of London, but also to make sure that if anybody breaks the law, action is taken. You'll be aware that what they can do is, with the organisers, work out the routes of the march and so forth. And in real time, the police make arrests if anybody breaks the law. You'll be aware of the horrible case where somebody had on their clothing an image of a paraglider, and you'll understand why that's just so objectionable, so offensive and so criminal. But also the police are monitoring social media as well in and around days of March to make sure action is taken. Nick, the bad news is, as I said, you're not the first person who is Jewish who's said they're frightened to come into London. It's really important we do whatever we can to make sure people like you don't feel scared, and that's why we're going to work with the police to make sure there's additional policing in and around those parts of the demonstrations, the marches, to make sure everyone does feel safe.
Is there a point at which the behaviour of a minority becomes grounds for preventing a majority from protesting?
Yeah, and I should deal with that as well, Nick. So basically, there's legislation set out it's in the Public Order Act, which gives the Home Secretary the power in limited circumstances to ban marches. It's on advice from the police. And the context is, this legislation has been in place since the 1980s. Very, very infrequently. I think there's only been one occasion. I think Theresa May was the Home Sec, and she banned a march taking place in a certain part of London. So if it's the case that the police have got concerns around a particular march, they can ask the Home Secretary to ban a march, and a ban in those circumstances could be could be banned. I understand from the Commissioner that threshold has not been reached. That being said, can I make this one point? I think freedom of speech is important, but I think we've got to recognise, living in a society, we should be respectful of the consequences of things we say. So even though, strictly speaking, you may not be breaking the law, question, is that sort of behaviour, those sorts of chants, reflective of being a good neighbour, a good friend, a good work colleague? So what I'm saying to people in all sorts of campaigns is be cognizant of the consequence of your actions. Yes, you may be behaving in a way that's lawful, strictly speaking, but understand the impact your words are having on your friends, neighbours and colleagues, because when the Middle East conflict is over, we've got to carry on being friends, neighbours and colleagues, and don't inadvertently make that more difficult rather than easier.
What do you specifically fear, Nick, for people who don't really know what the... I don't think Nick's there anymore. That's a shame. 26 minutes after 10, on with the calls.
Thanks, Nick, for your call. The next caller is from Northampton, and it's Christopher. Good morning, Christopher.
Good morning. I've been looking to move to London to study and work. I've had London landlords ask me to bid, and even one telling me they wanted 2 years' worth of rent up front. Should I give up or look somewhere else? How can I compete in this market?
Well, Christopher, I'm really sorry about the experience you're having. I'm afraid we're hearing more and more of that. So frankly speaking, over a long period of time, we've not built the homes we need in our great cities. So the supply is not met up with demand. So more and more people are renting privately. And so what we've been lobbying the government to do is to improve the private rental market, to make rents more affordable, but to give tenants more rights. And there's a bill going through Parliament where the government promised that they would make it easier for private tenants, for example, removing no-fault evictions and so forth. The government's watering down that bill. We're going to carry on lobbying the government to give people like you more rights. Please keep on looking in relation to property in London.
It's not much use for him, though, is it, really?
No, but please
when
keep
do you
on
start,
looking,
Chris? When do you start? Where are you hoping to go, and when does the term start for you? September?
I'm currently studying LSE, so I'm commuting. But
from Northampton?
Yeah, from Northampton, but I'm looking to expand out work opportunities in London because it's an amazing city.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's just when people want 2 years worth of rent in advance, you just tell them where to go, basically.
No, but Christopher, we're here. I'm also hearing about people having to bid more than the asking price. That's which is because of supply and demand issues. People are the rent maybe I'm making this up £1,000 a month, but the landlords are accepting bids above that because people realise that property is so hot, it's very difficult to get properties and stuff. And that's why it's really important to do what we can to fix the rental market, but also to make sure more homes are built. LSC, by the way, does have student accommodation.
Not for master's students, I don't think.
Is that right, Christopher?
Or it's harder for master's students.
I'm studying a bit part-time.
Oh, I see, yes.
Okay, I take that back.
I see.
But still, you want to be able to do a bit of part-time work, a bit of part-time studying, and 2 months rent up front, 2 years rent up front. It squeezes all but the best funded candidates out of the market completely, doesn't it?
No, it does. And we're hearing more. I mean, some good employers, Christopher, are trying to find a way around this by giving their employees interest-free loans to help them with deposits and stuff. We do that in City Hall because we know the difficulties people have in relation to not having the savings to pay for deposits landlords are asking for. I'm afraid I can't give you an answer that will help you straight away, except to say we are building record numbers of new affordable homes. We are making sure we try and make it easier for tenants going forward, and that includes lobbying the government. James is right, it may not help you directly over the course of the next 2 months, but it'll help future Christophers from Northampton come into this great city.
I think we're just waiting for the embargoed report on the inquiry into the murderer of Sarah Everard. So we'll squeeze in one more call and then we'll get your early response to that. So one more call if you would.
Thanks, Christopher. The next call is from Edgware, and I think it's Ali. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, gentlemen. Very quickly, pleasure speaking to you both. Mr. Khan, what are you going to do to help Muslims report more Islamophobic and racist behaviour towards them? Because in my 52 years, I've seen it in my parents' generation, my generation, and now my children's generation, where unfortunately Pakistani Muslims, especially, that's the community I know, they just don't report to the police when they have racial behaviour towards them, and I think that is one of the biggest problems we have, because the communities don't feel that they are integrated enough.
Ali, so firstly, thanks for your question. I know it couldn't be easy for you to ring up. So there's this new phrase I've heard in the last 4 months, both from the Jewish community and the Muslim community, that was new to me. It's called heightened fear. And what that means, I understand, is, and you'll know this, Ali, and I experience this from speaking to my friends and family as well, is people are scared because they wear the headscarf or because they wear the Star of David. They're scared to go out. They're scared to enjoy the great joys of our city, whether it's restaurants, whether it's entertainment, whether it's using public transport, because they've got a heightened fear, because their experience they have from their friends and family is increased Islamophobia. And it increased anti-Semitism. So the first thing is please report it. If you're somebody who is from Muslim background, or you're being treated appallingly because of people thinking you're a Muslim and you don't want to go to the police, there's a great organisation called Tell Mama. TELL space MAMA. Similarly, if you're somebody who's Jewish or somebody who's been treated appallingly because people think you're Jewish, there's a great organisation called the Community Security Trust. So firstly, Ali, if it's a criminal offence, report it to the police. If people, for a variety of reasons don't want to go to the police, go to these two great organisations, Tell Mama, Tell CS, and CST. But the reason why it's important to report it, Ali, is because we then know the scale of the problem. And let me tell you the context and the reason why I was angry by what was said last Friday by the senior Tory. The context is this. In the last 4 months, we've seen a massive increase in anti-Semitism. We've also seen a massive increase in Islamophobia. And, senior politicians should understand that, and responsible politicians should be trying to address that and bring people together rather than throwing petrol on the flames of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So, Ali, I'm really sorry that you're going through what you're going through. It breaks my heart because I was always frustrated at the lack of progress, not really realising there's a danger things can go backwards and regress. And things are regressing because we aren't seeing those in the periphery saying things that are Islamophobic. We're seeing those in the mainstream saying things that are Islamophobic, and that's why we should worry.
Well, how do you do that? What can the Labour Party do to help that footballification, if you like, of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia? Raphael Baer in The Guardian was brilliant on this subject yesterday in the sense that whether by accident or design, anti-Semitism is perceived as a problem for the left in this country at this point in history. We should be pretty clear about that. And Islamophobia is seen as a problem for the right. How does a senior Labour politician of any background move towards the necessary recognition that two wrongs are never going to make a right.
Well, I hope, and I say this without pomposity and with a bit of humility, I've shown it's possible to do that. The first event I did in 2016, was to go to a Yom HaShoah event, which is a commemoration, remembering those 6,000 Jewish people, men, women and children who lost their lives in the Second World War. I've spent a lot of time with the Jewish communities, not just reassuring that community, but also addressing the legitimate concerns they had about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, but also in our society. And we've got to carry on doing that. We've got to be building bridges. We've got to be uniting people. We've got to be making sure that we remind people about the similarities. And here's one of life's wonderful ironies. Jewish people and Muslim people, not just because of the Abrahamic context of their both faiths, but because of their lived experiences, have got so much in common in relation to hatred because of the religion they belong to, issues in relation to discrimination because of their dress, whether it's a headscarf, whether it's Star of David, whatever it may be, Orthodox Jews and the challenges they have in relation to poverty, deprivation, same with many members of the Muslim community from certain ethnic origins. And so we've got so much in common. And normally these communities work incredibly well together. But we know when there's tensions in the Middle East, it can lead to an increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But I think responsible politicians, and Raf talks about this in his Guardian piece, should be bringing people together rather than bringing them apart. And my concern is what you've seen from the Tory party is playing into that narrative. Whereas, the Conservative Party, rightly or wrongly, are seen as a party for Jewish people. The Labour Party, fairly or unfairly, is seen as a party for Muslim followers, which is frankly not true. But I think you've got to reach across and make sure people understand that they can be supported, reassured and helped, irrespective of your political party, but simply the fact you're a decent person.
Thank you. And looking now, turning your attention to this report into Wayne Couzens, the murderer of Sarah Everard, Dame Elish Angiolini has looked at whether potential risks that he posed were missed during his policing career. I know you've had a chance to have a cursory look at some of the findings, and I should probably issue a trigger warning at some of the things that I'm going to share from the 350-page report. In fact, some of it I'm not going to share on the radio until I've taken some advice. But it found that he had shown friends and colleagues violent pornography, shared unsolicited images of his genitals to young women. He allegedly possessed indecent images of children, all manner of opportunities the report has found to have identified the predatory sexual behaviour that was apparent 24 years before his rape and murder of Sarah Everard. And the phrase, the quote that jumps out from this report is that he should never have been a police officer. How the hell did this happen?
I want to begin this by remembering Sarah, not this man. Sarah Everard had a fantastic future ahead of her and was taken away from her by this police officer. And we should remember Sarah this weekend. It's the 3rd anniversary of her tragic and premature death. I've been concerned for some time that there are systemic and cultural issues within our police service across the country that allow people like him to become a police officer and stay a police officer. What's quite clear from his track record, but also this report done by this eminent Scottish lawyer, is that a number of police forces could have taken action to stop him being a police officer or to kick him out and didn't. This is somebody who'd worked for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, worked for Kent Police and worked for the Met Police Service. And we now have confirmation there were red flags that should have brought him to the attention of those in positions of power and influence and kicked him out. We also know, unfortunately, many people don't like reporting things because action is not taken, but also some people don't realise wrong is wrong. And that's why it's so incredibly important that there are these, embedded changes in the police service across the country. I think it's far too easy to become a police officer. It's far too difficult to get rid of a police officer. But in any work environment...
It didn't used to be this easy, did it?
But here's the issue is, in any work environment, whether it's LBC, whether it's City Hall, whether it's Sainsbury's, some things are wrong. Right? Forget that you're a police officer. Surely if a colleague is sending you this sort of stuff, it's wrong and you should report it and make sure action is taken.
Because his nickname was the rapist, according to some reports.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why, this report was done was to get a proper, facts being found as to what happened, and we can then make sure we can learn the lessons about what needs to be done. But the heartbreaking news is this isn't the only man who is a predator who has done horrible things, who is a police officer. We know subsequently a man called Carrick was identified to be a serial rapist. We only had in the last 2 weeks an example of another police officer who's also been found to have done appalling things, but was known to have a track record. And that's why there is an issue in relation to vetting. But it's not just about vetting, it's the culture within the police service. Because you've talked about, photographs being shared, people in the police service clearly knowing this man was, in inverted commas, dodgy, but no action taken.
This is that you're highlighting the difference between bad apple and institutional,
Spot on. By the way, so I think bad apples is too easy.
Yeah.
Isolated individuals who are problematic, let's get them out. It's not about that. Because you just shared just one of the summaries of the report, which is other people knew there's a problem, didn't take action because of the culture allowed this to happen, and the culture wasn't one where action was taken. That's the difference between an organisation that should be, anti-misogynistic, anti-racist, anti-homophobic, and one that will take action against individuals when it's brought to their attention. And that's why there's got to be these, deep systemic cultural changes. And you'll also recall, I was criticised hugely for saying the former commissioner, in my view, didn't have a plan to address these issues, didn't understand these issues, which is why ultimately I lost confidence with her. But this ain't just a Met issue. This is not just a Met Police issue. Do not be lulled into a false sense of security if you're living around the country. Oh, our police officers, the cultures here are fantastic, because you'll hear later on today from the National Police Chiefs Council, but also Sir Mark Rowley, about the issues across the country. And that's what this report shows. Ain't just a Met Police issue, ain't just a Kent issue, it ain't just a civil nuclear issue. It's an issue for policing across our country.
It is now 20 to 11. Very briefly, I think you a moment ago accidentally said 6,000 instead of 6 million when you cited the whole.
I beg your pardon. Of course, it's 6 million. Of course, it's 6 million.
There'll be somebody keen to try and make a meal.
And the reason why Yom HaShoah is so important, it specifically remembers the 6 million Jewish people who lost their lives, and so we have Holocaust Memorial Day, which remembers other genocides, but Yom HaShoah is deliberately for remembering. It's a mourning that the Jewish community has for the 6 million Jewish men, women and children who lost their lives.
Thank you, Sadiq Khan. I hope we'll derive some comfort from the fact that the tone of my inbox today is notably different from how it usually is as a consequence of your quite emotional words at the beginning of this month's Speak to Sadiq. Let's hope it's back to business as usual next month. The time now is 20 to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:45 is the time, and I'm tempted, I am going to cross live to the press conference that has followed the publication of the report into an inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard. And although we missed the beginning of it because the Mayor of London was here, let's just cross live to that now.
Despite having his home address and knowing that he was the only male insured to drive the car, Kent Police closed the case and took no further action. They did so without making any attempt to speak to a further witness or to Cousins himself. This was a grave error and a very obvious red flag. By failing to properly investigate the allegation, Kent Police missed a valuable opportunity to disrupt or even prevent Cousins' future offending, and to bring into question his position as an authorised firearms officer with the CNC. Victims reported allegations of indecent exposure to the police on 4 occasions before Cousins' arrest. The 2 allegations reported to Kent were inadequately investigated. In addition to the 2015 allegation, Kent Police also responded to an allegation of masturbatory indecent exposure directed at a lone cyclist in a narrow country lane in 2020. With limited investigation, the case was closed. Had the investigation been more thorough, it is possible that Cousins might have been identified as an alleged sex offender and his offending and policing career disrupted. Just days before he abducted Sarah Everard, Cousins was reported for exposing himself at a drive-through. The investigation into these allegations by the Metropolitan Police Service also fell below the standards any victim of crime should expect. For example, available evidence such as CCTV was not collected or considered. He was only interviewed and charged for those further offences of indecent exposure after his conviction for Sarah's murder. He was convicted for 2 of the reported crimes at the drive-through and the crime where he was reported for masturbating towards a lone cyclist on a narrow country lane. The inquiry is aware of 5 other alleged incidents of sexual offending involving cousins, which, for many understandable reasons, were never reported to the police. Given the known underreporting of sexual offences, I believe there may be even more victims of cousins offending. Data tells us that women do not always report being victims of indecent exposure. Evidence of the inquiry showed that policing does not always respond to it as it should. I make recommendations about improving the ways that police respond to those who report such crimes. I also recommend an immediate review be undertaken of indecent exposure allegations against serving police officers. My task in part 1 of the inquiry was to examine the facts and circumstances of the case of Wayne Couzens and the cultures in which he worked. Policing is, however, not a homogeneous whole. Pockets of different cultures exist within police forces, and police culture is something that will be examined during part 2 of this inquiry. Good police officers work alongside those who abuse their powers, behave inappropriately with their colleagues, and do a disservice to the profession of policing. Some, like Couzens, manipulate their image at work to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Outside of work, Couzens was reported in 2020 to have been seen wearing a police belt and items of police equipment while off duty. He described himself as an undercover officer. He was not. Although Wayne Couzens was not wholly a product of his working environments, those environments did nothing to discourage his misogynistic view of women and meant that providing he presented himself as professional, his deviant behaviour outside of work could flourish. Policing leaders need to radically transform their approach to police culture if future offenders like Couzens are to be denied opportunities to abuse police powers for sexual purpose. It is time certain types of behaviour, from the unacceptable to the criminal, and low standards are simply not tolerated in policing. This report is part 1 of the Angelini inquiry. Part 2 is underway, and the terms of reference for this work includes a broader national consideration of police vetting and recruitment, police culture and standards, and the protection of women in public spaces. This includes other tragic cases of femicide in public spaces. My approach to Part 2 is informed by what I have learned during the course of Part 1. Part 3 of the inquiry is an investigation into the crimes and career of former Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick. That work is also underway. The 16 recommendations I make are not all new. Failures of investigation, failures of HR processes, and failures of vetting policy and practice are a depressingly familiar refrain in policing. Now is the time for change. Without a significant overhaul, there is nothing to stop another Wayne Couzens operating in plain sight. I would urge all those in authority in every police force in the country to read this report and take immediate action. Sarah's parents and loved ones live in the perpetual grief and pain of having lost Sarah in this way. Her death and the public discourse it caused should galvanise those responsible for policing to ensure that those who have the privilege and power of protecting us can be trusted. Thank you.
Time is 10:52. That was Dame Eilish Angiolini there delivering the key findings from her report, and it is a report that runs into hundreds of pages, delivering the key findings of her report into the murder of Sarah Everard, and the crucial question of how her murderer could ever have become a police officer. One line that jumps out from that report is of course the statement that he should never have been one. And as I mentioned to you earlier, some of the details of the offences that he had committed before in this 350-page report Well, they beg a belief. It is truly extraordinary. I know that in journalism sometimes hyperbole is a bit commonplace and some words are overused, but it truly boggles the mind. That's why we stayed with it for the duration, just up until the end of the press conference there, up until the end of Dame Eilish's comments, and because it was shock and scandal upon shock and scandal. After 11 o'clock, we'll catch up with Fraser Knight shortly, who has been in the room as that press conference unfolded and who has spent the morning locked in a room with the 350-page report, so we'll know a little bit more about it than we've been able to glean thus far. But after that, I think the issue that jumps out from what we just heard is the treatment of indecent exposure. Two things there: that it is rarely reported or often not reported, and when it is, the police response is inadequate. We've touched in the past upon this curious national attitude to the kind of crimes that you just heard described, sometimes in graphic detail, for which I hope you were prepared. And by that I mean an almost seaside postcard smuttiness sometimes with regard to, you think of the flasher and the Mac and the just not quite, but almost carry-on film type characterisation of these kind of characters, and therefore these kinds of crimes. So I think that we will have a look at that after the next news bulletin, just to prepare you and hopefully encourage you to contribute. At some point in the coming days, I'd love to have a phone-in with police officers about how the hell you process this, because I think something that the Mayor and I were discussing earlier is relevant to every single one of you, and that is the difference between bad apple and institutional. But as I mentioned, Fraser Knight has not only been at that press conference with Dame Eilish Angiolini, but also has had access to the embargoed report for much of this morning. Fraser joins me now. Fraser, what have you learned? What are the most shocking revelations to emerge this morning?
Well, I think, James, we knew that there had been some opportunities missed to get rid of Wayne Couzens before he went on to abduct and murder Sarah Everard. But reading through this report, it's clear that there are many more than what we had previously thought. Lady Eilish Angiolini has said that before Wayne Couzens joined the police, well before he joined the police, he sexually assaulted a child. He tried to kidnap a woman at knife point, and over the course of his life and his career, he was reported to police 8 times in relation to indecent exposures before he was actually arrested after having killed Sarah Everard. Now, Lady Eilish Angiolini has said that there needs to be a complete overhaul to police vetting and recruitment, and she's also said there needs to be a step change to how police investigate non-contact sexual offences, so those like flashing indecent exposure. She said there were multiple failed opportunities to get rid of Wayne Couzens through his career. She revealed that he even failed vetting at one point when he was trying to become a PC in Kent Police, but then went on to be welcomed into the Civil Nuclear Constabulary and then, of course, transferred to the Metropolitan Police, where they didn't re-vet him. But Lady Angiolini saying that what concerned her is that even after he'd killed Sarah Everard and the Metropolitan Police reviewed his vetting clearance, they stood by that. They said we would still have hired him at that point because of where the vetting guidelines stood at the time. Now, they say that has changed since, but still extraordinary revelation to come out of that, with the Metropolitan Police telling the review that they would still have hired him given what was on his record.
I suppose we should recall that a number of women were arrested by the same Metropolitan Police at a vigil for Sarah Everard, but perhaps a little early to be zoning in on that. The purpose of the report, where does it go? I mean, she makes 16 recommendations. What pressure is brought to bear upon the Metropolitan Police or other institutions, other police services, of course, to introduce them?
Well, this is not a statutory public inquiry, so they are just recommendations that have been made. But I think there is really, a strong feel from police leaders, from senior politicians as well, that they do want to be seen to making a change here. So again, those recommendations, including a step change to investigating indecent exposure, for example, but also a complete overhaul in terms of how they recruit and communicate vetting procedures when police officers move between different forces. Now, this is just part one of the Angelini inquiry. She was looking at the timeline of Wayne Couzens' career. What she'll do now is she'll go on to look again at the culture in policing. And what she had said in this report was that Wayne Couzens had been abusing women well before he joined the police. But she said the environment that he went into allowed his deviant behaviour to flourish. So I think, that part two report will be very scathing. Again, very similar, I think, to what the Baroness Casey review was like, but this time looking further afield at all police forces. And then there will be part three, where Dame Lady Angelini will be looking at David Carrick and his crimes. Of course, he served on the same team that Wayne Couzens did, and then was convicted of being one of the country's most prolific rapists in modern history. So some really scathing statements being made, a lot of difficult work and difficult reading for police leaders as well.
Yeah, that's an extremely pertinent point, Fraser. That the idea that somebody possessed of these views could find an environment in which they could flourish within the Metropolitan Police Service is, it's damning it's institutionally damning, isn't it? It gives the complete lie to any notion of bad apple syndrome.
I also think this goes further than the Metropolitan Police. This also looked at his time in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. It was then that he was reported for indecent exposure, 2015, while he was in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. And despite that, we saw just on that report, actually, the investigation was closed down within 9 days without having, progressed it any further. And despite that, he then got to move to the Metropolitan Police and continued to offend. So it is a much wider issue and something that all police leaders will be looking at. In fact, this afternoon we'll be speaking to some of those leaders, including Sir Mark Rowley of the Metropolitan Police and the Chief Constable of the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, alongside the Police Chiefs Council, to see exactly what they're going to change. There's lots of questions that they need to answer, and lots of these recommendations that I imagine they should be wanting to implement as soon as possible.
And yet, as your reference to Dame Louise Casey reminds us, some of these questions has, of course, been asked, and at least in a rhetorical sense, answered before. Fraser Knight, thank you very much indeed for that report. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just a quick word, if you don't mind, on Dave Myers. It's a funny thing about telly, isn't it? That you can feel you know somebody even though you've never actually met them, or possibly just sort of waved at them across a crowded cocktail party. I always think of Fred Dibner. I don't know if you're familiar with Fred Dibner, the Lancastrian steeplejack who became a television presenter and just had an extraordinary ability to communicate enthusiasm for his subject. And it means that you could be talking about astrophysics like Brian Cox, or steam engines, as Fred Dibner often did, or cooking and motorbikes like Dave Myers did, and you were guaranteed pleasure in their company. You may be surprised to learn that I'm a huge fan of the Hairy Bikers, and the announcement today of his passing by his best friend and on-screen partner, Cy King, is particularly poignant because the new series on the telly touches upon the belief that he would never be on telly again when he first got ill. He's been battling cancer now for a couple of years. He thought it was all over, and so the series currently, I can't quite remember whether it's been broadcast for the first time or repeated. I think it's a new series, but the subtext of the whole thing is his joy at actually getting another crack at the whip. He said in the episode earlier this week he never thought he'd get on a motorbike again, and of course he did. So I just thought I'd mention that because he is very much, for those of us familiar with his work, in what I always think of. Because of my age, obviously younger people listening to this won't have the first idea who Fred Dibner is, but there's something about the alchemy of television and expertise, television and enthusiasm. So it's why the best cook in the world isn't going to be the best TV chef. You know, it's why the best footballer in the world isn't going to be the best pundit, or indeed the best presenter. It's a magical little combination of ingredients, if you pardon the pun, and they had it. They had it together. Dave Myers and his friend, his grieving friend, Cy King. It's 11:06. We're going to talk about something completely different now, and well, from that. But we're returning to the territory of the report into Sarah Everard's murder, and we're going to pick up on what is clearly a crucial point within it. I'm not going to debate what is the most crucial finding. The litany of crimes that he committed before becoming a police officer was extraordinary, and indeed the knowledge that some of his employers had, whether the Kent Police Service or the Civil Nuclear Constabulary or the Metropolitan Police, while still deciding that he was a suitable candidate for employment, it's actually quite. Sometimes it doesn't happen very often on the programme. I just talked about it with my colleague during the break. Sometimes you can't quite believe what you're hearing or reading. I'm not comfortable running through once again the list of some of the details that have emerged in the course of this report today, because they are gross. They are truly, truly gross. But then you remember that you're talking about someone who was permitted to join the police service despite this being known, despite this being, if not known by the people making the decisions, then it being known by somebody they could have blooming well asked. And yet the line that I think we'll pick up on is this approach to what we, I think, unhelpfully have referred to as flashing over the years. Certainly when I was growing up, flashing would be the phrase that was used, and it has a different impact, doesn't it, from indecent exposure or almost a sort of form of assault, albeit that there's no physical contact. And there are two things that Dame Eilish has picked up on, and the first is the failure of many women to report it, which I think is inextricably linked to the failure of many police officers and police services to properly investigate it. And this again is one of those things where your male privilege, for want of perhaps a better phrase, is really in overdrive, because all I mean by that is that we generally have absolutely no idea of how commonplace this is. Sometimes you sit around a table and the conversation starts about women on the London Underground. I live in London. There'll be regional equivalents of this. Women on the London Underground being victims of inappropriate touching or men, forgive me, rubbing themselves against them. And you sit there sometimes as a bloke, because everybody around the table is someone you know. It can include your own partner. And women talk about some of this stuff as if it is the most commonplace thing in the world, as if it is an occupational hazard of being a woman in the 21st and 20th century. And as a bloke, and I don't think this makes me extraordinary or particularly naive, as a bloke you sit there going, well, crikey, and I knew that it happened, but I thought it was extraordinary. I didn't realise it was ordinary. I didn't realise that it is so commonplace that in some ways you never cease to be hurt and offended, but you cease, and indeed you never cease to be shocked, but you perhaps cease to be surprised. So I want to look at it from three angles, with your permission. The first is the lived experience of it, and we need this, because that's the only way that you can properly spear the second issue. Because the real mystery here is how on earth police can not know what a serious crime it is. So I want you to tell me, if you can, what happened to you and how it made you feel. 0345 6060 973. Because there are women potentially listening to this who were victims of Wayne Couzens' offending, and the failure of society, I think, not just police, to properly appreciate how serious it is and how traumatic it can be, must be a huge part of my second question, which is this. And anyone can answer this, although, fellow lads, I would urge you to remember that this is an almost entirely female issue. Do you know, even on a day like today, I will get texts from men complaining about that, which is really the point made in a much more powerful fashion than I ever could about what male privilege looks like. We'll probably get some people trying to mansplain what it's like to be flashed at as a young woman. But anyway, the second question becomes, why does society have the attitude that society has? I'm not letting any police officers off the hook here, but I'm fairly confident that you are familiar with the phrase flasher Mac or flashers Mac, and the idea of a dirty old man wandering around with his genitals on display but hidden by a Mac, which he then flaps open in order to... I mean, almost everybody of my age will have encountered, quotes, humour, end quotes, predicated upon that practice. So that's part of the reason, surely, why attitudes of seriousness are diminished, why it is not treated as seriously as it clearly should be. And then we come to the third question. So it's you know, what's it like to be on the receiving end of this sort of behaviour? Not just the moment of criminality, but the aftermath, the decision to report it, the experience of reporting it. That's the personal question. The social question then becomes, why do we all have this weird attitude, especially when half of the population is women? And I'm fairly confident that the massive majority of women will not share the idea that it's no big deal. And I used to tell a story on air, didn't I, that kind of proves the point in a way. And I think the reason why I could tell the story on air was because it was the woman in the scenario, although actually it doesn't quite work. I scratch that. I may give you a little bit more detail later, but it wasn't that actually. It was on a nudist beach, so that doesn't apply at all. But the idea that we don't think women think that it is a very big deal, when clearly you do, and it is. So there's a responsibility here socially for the weird seeping into public consciousness that it's not a very big deal, when at least half of the population will be clear that it is. So how and why do you think that has happened? That's the personal and the social. And then I think that the third question is the legal question, which is pretty simply, why is it treated so poorly by the police? It wouldn't be treated so casually by the police if society didn't have such a strange attitude towards it. And society shouldn't have such a strange attitude towards it, given how traumatic and unpleasant the experience can actually be. So there are three questions that essentially all speak to the same issue. Without the trauma, there wouldn't be a mystery about society's attitude. And without society's attitude, there wouldn't be a very plodding response, a failure of the police to take it seriously. If you can knit all three of those together for me, I'll be incredibly grateful. But I'm very, very conscious that what for me is a radio conversation, a radio topic, a phone-in topic, for you will be among some of the nastiest and most unpleasant memories that you have. So please don't think for a moment that I'm not cognizant and conscious of how serious this subject is. I just don't think you can have a conversation about how serious it is without acknowledging the fact that police forces, never mind people, and society in general have spent decades failing to appreciate or acknowledge or properly recognise how serious this is. And forgive me for not mentioning this earlier, the reason why this matters is because the proven risk is that if you don't pick up on people like Wayne Couzens when they're behaving in ways that can be filed under all of the descriptions I've just deployed, there is a strong chance that they will move on to doing ever more disgusting things. So if you needed any rationale at all for the importance of this conversation, there it is.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 11. Do you want a little quiz, or should we save? I think we should save the levity for Mystery Hour today. But there are a couple of stories around that I think will put a smile on your face, which is not something anyone could say about the story under discussion now. How do we end up? John Podmore's been in touch. He's a former prison governor who often treats us to the benefits of his experience on LBC. He tells me the problem with sex offenders such as, quotes, flashers, end quotes, is that if they get prison sentences of under 4 years, they're unlikely to receive any treatment and they will be banged up with like-minded individuals. Sex offender treatment in prison it generally has a bad reputation as well. So part of the sort of logistical answer to the question. Let's get back to the personal. Catherine's in Birmingham. Catherine, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a first-time caller. I think for me, as a woman, this has happened to me 3 times in my life, but particularly around the time of the Sarah Everard case. Yes. I was running in a park in Birmingham, a normal route I'd done, many times before, 7 a.m. in the morning, and a man jumped out of a bush, fully naked from the waist below, and just stood there in front of me. And, I actually did swear at him and then ran off. And he ran off, and I rang the police. And when I spoke to the police, they said that they were well aware of this gentleman, that I wasn't the first person that this had happened to. But they obviously hadn't been able to, apprehend
him.
Apprehend him, exactly. And I think, particularly as it was all around the same time as the Wayne Couzens thing, I just thought the problem is with people like this is, like you've said already, is where does it stop? Because they don't do these things as a one-off, and that's fulfilled whatever fantasy or thing it is. But these things escalate into behaviours and cases.
Seems, fairly. Possibly not in every case, but that's irrelevant, isn't it? Clearly, there's a gateway offence, if that's the correct phrase to use, and people will escalate from there to more serious offences, which makes you wonder why the police didn't have someone hiding in another bush, doesn't it, really?
They did say to me that they were going to put police in plain clothes in the park, but as I said to your researcher, I wonder how inconspicuous they'll be at 7 a.m. with 2 sort of people just walking randomly around a park when most people are running, or with a dog.
And when the offender is waiting for lone women with no onlookers. I mean, literally.
Exactly.
Oh, so did you hear from them again after you reported it?
No, I've never heard from them
Not
again.
a word, not a whisper?
No, nothing.
Were you surprised by that?
No, I wasn't expecting. Again, I had a similar experience 3 or 4 years ago when a man approached me on a bus, and I called the police and they refused to come out. My dad was actually a serving officer in the Met at the time, and he put a call in, and then suddenly they did manage to come out.
But again, no collars, no.
No, and I also think that shouldn't be a factor in it anyway. Police should be attending these incidences regardless.
Oh, that's a very good point. What's your answer to my second question? Why do you think society does have such a... I'm not quite sure what the word I'm looking for is, but I think I've communicated the general feeling, almost like a seaside postcard approach to these offences. Some people listening to your description there of a bloke showing, indecently exposing his genitals to you, even in the context of the conversation that we're having, some people will think it's funny. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think obviously some of it is down to, society's views and, some misogyny within society. But I think it's very easy to look at it as a wider thing, but when it's your daughter or it's your sister or it's your partner, you
wouldn't think it was funny at all,
then it doesn't become funny. And it's impacted me. I run with a rape alarm. I don't run at certain times, and I should be allowed to go running around parks in Birmingham whenever I feel like it.
You can't argue with that. It feels like an oil tanker, doesn't it? It's we can share our shock at what the inquiry has found, but it isn't the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last, because the inquiry moves on. I think to look at some of David Garrick's backstory as well, and yet the idea of changing this, I don't know what the equivalent would be. I'm always stunned to remember that it was impossible to, and I should put trigger warnings all over this hour, but it was impossible to rape your own wife while I was alive. That change in law, I was born in 1972, and I always find that extraordinary. It was also true in the course of my lifetime that a woman would need to have any loan guaranteed by a man. So her father or her husband, if she wanted to buy a telly on hire. I don't know how, and don't ring me on this because the conversations we're having are much more important in this moment. I don't know how robustly that law was enforced. I don't know how robustly either law was enforced. But when you think that the mountain seems too high to climb, it's helpful sometimes to look back at the mountains that society has already climbed. And those are 2 fairly big examples of how a society, a civilization can undertake an extraordinary transformation in attitude, but we definitely need one here, and it's definitely extraordinary. Jeff picks up on the ITV, I think, comedian Benny Hill, who very often, and this isn't a criticism of him, or times change, which is the point I was just making, and that's another example of why we've got an end of peer, Seaside Postcard, Carry On film, Benny Hill, underpinning of these very, very serious crimes, which is to explain why perhaps they're not taken as seriously as they should be. Never, ever, ever to excuse. Thank you, Catherine. Susie's in Manchester. Susie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'll attempt to answer your questions as much as you've got time for, but I think to the question about why is it kind of okay, why do people seem to accept it, even though perhaps we've changed our views in terms of those mountains that you were talking about. I'm a psychotherapist. I trained and worked with rape crisis. I'm a survivor of sexual assault and particularly this type of sexual harassment myself. And I think it's about a window of tolerance, a term that we use in counselling, but I'm going to apply it to society.
Yeah.
And if you think about, you talked about Ouija women a couple of weeks ago. If you think about the women in Gaza at the moment, there's like a hierarchy of trauma. And I think anything to do with consent, which is a really difficult topic as it is, there's almost like a scale. Yeah. So, we can kind of trivialise that it was funny that the guy didn't mean to do any harm. Oh, and he didn't touch you in a flashing incident. But then we can look at these women who where, rape is weaponised as part of conflict and think, okay, well, that's far away from us. But yeah, it was definitely worse. And I think, from my sort of perspective in my line of work, the impact that it has on women, as much as, a bit like the example you talked about around the table with everybody saying, oh, yeah, of course that happened to me. It's part of life. The impact that it actually does in terms of confidence, in terms of how people are when they go to work, in terms of, how they form relationships, it's really pernicious because it says to women that we don't matter. Yeah. And I think that's the impact that, is really difficult to deal with. And I think in terms... Sorry, go on.
No, sorry, I'm just listening.
And I just think in terms of that point about sentencing that you said John kind of texted in before about, weirdly enough, I used to be a lawyer in a former life. And I think that this is part of it. The police don't take it seriously because they know that the CPS won't, because the CPS can't, because the sentencing laws and the way the trial system is set up for kind of women in sexual harassment or sexual assault cases is so flawed that no one's going to do it. So the women sit around the table and suck it up and won't go. The police won't take it seriously because they won't prosecute.
Because there's no point. There's no pay dirt at the end of the process for them, as it were, in terms of convictions and meaningful sentencing.
Exactly that. There's a thing called inchoate offences, which is like attempt or conspiracy. You get more sentencing for those, you get a higher sentence for those than you do for actually committing a crime around sexual harassment and sexual assault, for example.
I don't understand that. It seems absurd. What's the, with your psychotherapist hat on, what's the motivation for the imposition of the hierarchy? Why does it happen? Why is there an impulse to do it? How does it help us to impose it?
Yeah, I think that's back to window of tolerance. I think that we can't look at this because it will remind us that something likely happened to us or happened to someone close to us, and we can't deal with that right now. Certainly we can't deal with that without appropriate support. And so we are happy to isolate ourselves as well as others as a sort of secondary gain. But, it's not a nice system, obviously.
No, and yet when you move up that ladder of criminality, there comes a point where everybody is agreed about the egregiousness of an offence, doesn't there? It's weird how arbitrary it seems to be. I think you've touched on the possibility of physical contact being the pivot point. It probably is, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I think, with Sarah Everard, we're talking about the tragedy of a murder here.
Yes, of course.
But would we be talking about it if that hadn't happened? Would we be talking about what he actually did that led up to that was part of it? Yes, we all know about that now. But it's almost as though it has to get to that level for it to be deemed important.
Yes, and that I suppose that's on all of us. Well, not you, but it's on people in my profession as well who should be having these conversations. I'm pretty sure the last time we had this conversation was also in the context of Sarah Everard's murderer, actually, and I don't know how you avoid that because, of course, they don't get the news coverage they should get because they don't get the attention they should get because they don't get the police response they should get because they don't get the social response they should get. Susie, thank you so much. That was fascinating. It tallies with this text that came in while you were talking. As a serving police officer with the Met for 23 years, I can say that I have dealt with far too many indecent exposures by men. I can say I've always treated them with the utmost seriousness and have never seen any of my colleagues deal with them in any other way. In my opinion, the CPS inaction without a difficult case and police numbers mean that there simply aren't the officers to send to all the calls. 350 to 400 officers leaving the Met a month with about 6 new applicants. Do the maths, it's not good. That relevant to the current context, it wouldn't have been relevant 23 years ago on the numbers issue. And I take your point that you've always done your utmost and all of the colleagues that you work with have as well. But I'm afraid that the bad apple defence doesn't wash with me anymore. It may wash with some people listening. I think when Macpherson used the word institutional, we should all have paid a lot more attention, albeit that he was talking about racism rather than misogyny or sexism or simply an inadequate approach to certain sex crimes. But the difference between the bad apple theory and institutional, something we probably shouldn't have let the usual suspects gloss all over when that phrase institutional was first introduced into public discourse. And it is, of course, a phrase that Mark Rowley still rejects. I think that's an important point to make. He still says we shouldn't use that phrase because it makes his police officers feel bad. I'm beginning to think it's probably time that they did feel bad. Thomas Watts is here with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:34. Oh, please, writes this texter. Writes Rob, in fact. Your last message is part of the problem. They are not investigated properly, James. I'm a retired officer with 30 years' experience, and I can't abide police officers still claiming that these offences are investigated properly. Once again, it's part of the problem. That officer would probably have laughed at the fact that Cousins was nicknamed the rapist. Well, the trio of questions, really, all sort of interlinking with each other about the reality of indecent exposure, the curious attitude to it that society has, and the failure of police to take it seriously. Sally's in Worcester Park. Sally, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello. I'm a little bit nervous
It's only
because
me.
obviously this is quite a...
Well, that's very true, yes.
Yeah. So a bit of history. I have, over the years, well, since I was a child, I've been the victim, survivor of sexual assault, child sexual abuse. I've actually probably lost count now over the years of how many times I have been sexually assaulted by different men, not the same man, by different men, whether it's walking home from babysitting or on the bus going to school. I've kind of got to a point now where, because of not just my experiences, but experiences of family members who have been raped, who have been sexually assaulted, their dealings with the police, and nothing is done. It's just not done. It's not taken seriously. It's one of those things that a few years ago, it was actually just after the smoking ban came in pubs. Went outside. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon. It was my birthday. Went outside to have a cigarette. The pub is on High Street, and there's a little area to have a cigarette. Just sat there having a cigarette, and a man came out. Complaining about the smoking ban, and I just sat there and sort of, smiled and agreed, and and I looked away, and when I looked back, there it was. It was just there, right in my face.
Who did you tell? I mean, it's an experience that a man has simply can't get their head around. Because if an identical thing happened to a man, the response would be completely different. But who did you tell? Did you tell anyone? Did you report him?
Yeah. I mean, I was with my partner at the time.
Right. He was still inside.
He was inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, and whenever we're out, this is another thing. Whenever we're out, we will not go out together for a cigarette, just in case. Obviously, with drugs being put into drinks,
right.
Women have to think about that. So I came back inside, and I was kind of just in a bit of shock, and didn't quite know. Did that just happen? And I was questioning myself. Did I say something that made him think that this was acceptable behaviour?
And did you tell anyone in the pub? What happened?
I went to the bar, all female bar staff,
right.
Told them what had happened. They said, "Do you want us to phone the police?" And I said, "You know what? Because of experiences that I've had in the past, nothing's going to be done. He'll get a slap on the wrist. That'll be it. Maybe not even that. It'll be, you've had a couple to drink. You might be a little bit."
And how did they
drunk.
respond to the offender? How did they? Did he just come back in and pick his pint up?
He came back in, picked his pint up, went over and sat with the lads.
Right.
They're all sort of men in their sort of mid-50s. And
They're extraordinary.
The bar staff went over and said, "Look, you've got to leave. We're not tolerating that sort of behaviour." So he left, but all the rest of his friends stayed. And it got to a point where I was made so uncomfortable by this group of men that I had to leave.
That sort of sums up social attitudes in a nutshell, doesn't it? The idea that you'd done something wrong, or you had something to answer for, or you were responsible for what a scumbag like that had done, and you can't help thinking he was probably back in the pub 2 days later. Sally, I'm so sorry to hear that. And also the catalogue of experiences that you'd had. As I said at the start, it beggars belief, except, of course, it doesn't. The difference between the reaction of most men listening and most women listening will be not only enormous, but also a huge part of what it is that we're discussing. Do take care. 11:39 is the time. Don't forget the mystery hour's on the way. A few of you already pointing out that today, even more than most Thursdays, is a day when we will perhaps be grateful for the levity that Mystery Hour can sometimes bring, but no levity here. None whatsoever. Julie's in Sheffield. Julie, what would you like to say?
All those experiences are so familiar, aren't they, to all women? When I was young, my nana had an experience that she told us about, and it gave me confidence to react to a situation, because what happened to her was she was in a cinema, a guy put his hand on her leg, and she stabbed him with her hat pin. That's telling you how long ago that was. But it gave me...
That sounds like something out of Alan Bennett, doesn't it? I love that.
Well, it would have been
good for
her. It would have been 1930s.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but it gave me, psychologically, I suppose, the confidence then that if something happened to me, I could react. And so I did. So at 13, we got flashed. Yeah, it was called flashing.
Yeah.
On the bus by a man in a Mac, and my two friends giggling away, and I just looked at him and tutted. Tutted. And then when I was actually and this rubbing up against happens, frequently to women. It happened to me in a bus stop when I was in my 20s, and I elbowed him in the tummy. He was behind me, and I elbowed him and heard him gasp, and I was, that was my reaction. The only time I ever reported something was when I was, probably about 40, 30s, and I was in a department store, a Debenhams, and it had a toy section, and the guy came right behind me and he rubbed right across my bottom, and his hand went across my bottom, so it wasn't an accidental brush path.
Yeah.
I turned round and I slapped him across the face. Never done anything like that, and I just slapped him across the face and just went, "Don't you ever do that again." And he went off. But I was so upset because I was in a toys, children. I went to an assistant and I said, "I've just slapped a man," and because he rubbed across my bottom, but I slapped him. And she actually did report it to the security guy.
And did anything? Did anything happen?
Well, I don't know, because I was never. I gave my name. I wasn't.
And you never heard from them again.
No, I never heard. But I was glad that I'd reported it afterwards to somebody. But at the time, I felt I hit him.
So you could get into trouble for that.
Wrong.
Yes,
yeah,
of course
yeah,
you would be. Where do you think I know we haven't talked so much about indecent exposure because I don't think that the crimes you describe suffer from the same sort of treatment, although there's clearly a hierarchy of seriousness. Why do you think indecent exposure is so low on that hierarchy?
I think I'm 68, so I've grown up with the giggling, the flasher image, the Mac, that it's not anything sexual. Towards the woman.
Well, in the same way that rape is an act of power and violence, as opposed to, it is also sexual, but it's not sexual in the sense that you and I understand the word to mean.
No, and you don't know at 13 that guy who did that may go on to do something more serious. That never would have entered my head.
No.
At all, and even
I wonder what the numbers are.
When you've had your bum nipped,
No, well, we shouldn't. I mean, I wonder what the numbers are on escalation. I don't imagine they really exist, do they? But the idea that this character, if he'd been caught or properly disciplined earlier, then, and certainly using his police status to commit later crimes would have been impossible if he hadn't been a police officer. It doesn't mean he wouldn't have committed crimes, but he would have found the context would have been completely different.
It would have been different. But also, I think I want to say to women, no matter how old you are, girl or woman, nearly 70 like me, call it out. If somebody flashes, point it out and laugh and say,
if you can, though, Julie.
It's too smart. Yes, if you can.
I'm always slightly wary of giving advice from a position of I don't know, strength that you possess, that you clearly inherited from your nan. I'm always slightly wary that we can make some women feel worse than they do already, because in that moment they couldn't find it. They didn't know how to behave, and or they were too frightened, or they were frozen. So you're obviously right up to the point that we acknowledge anyone who doesn't do that is in no way to blame for not doing it. The same with the physical response. The same with an elbow in the belly or a slap across the face.
Yeah, I wouldn't advise that if there's somebody there to tell.
No.
Tell.
Nor would I. But you mentioned your age, which you brought into the conversation. I'm far too gallant and chivalrous to have done anything like that. But you've mentioned it now. So looking back over those decades, where do we sit now in terms of how bad the experience is, do you think? And obviously for anybody, it's going to change according to the age you are. But as you look across the vista of society and you read and hear about stories like the one we're discussing today, have things got better in the course of your lifetime?
I think things haven't got better. I think they're acknowledged. They're acknowledged. I never told my mum that there was somebody on the bus, but I would hope that girls now would, or boys would tell.
Would come home and talk about
somebody
it.
And come home and talk about it. And I think that the fact that we are talking about it, and people then will say, yes, that happened to me multiple times over our lives. And there's a difference between being in a nightclub when somebody is, wanting to speak to you and they've got their hand on your arm or whatever. Different to actually doing something that's, that their intentions are different.
Well, yes, and I guess part of that is about removing shame and stigma and culpability and the old kind of almost puritanical approaches to womanhood and creating a space in which it's clear that if something like this happens to you, there is one and only one person to blame. It's the person that did it. Julie, thank you. It's 11:46. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mystery Hour on the way at 12. And actually, before that, if I told you that GBB's had paid more money to Conservative MPs than it had to Labour MPs, would you think that it had paid... let's just have a little think about this. Would you think that it had paid 60 times more to Conservative MPs than Labour MPs, 6 times more, or 6,000 times more? I'll tell you the answer. I think I've got my maths wrong, but I'll tell you the answer either way after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Shall we do that again? By what multiple has the GBB's television channel paid Tory MPs more than Labour MPs? Has it paid them 6 times more since it launched, whenever that was? Has it paid them 60 times more? Or has it paid them 600 times more? Has GBB's paid Tory MPs 600 times more than Labour MPs to appear? 60 times more or 6 times more? You can enter that one if you want. If I said 6,000 earlier, then obviously that's silent option D, which would involve none of the above. 11:51 is the time. I tell you what perhaps we haven't done, and this is my fault because I was a bit shy to ask. And I don't want it to sound like it needs explaining, because you can imagine and speculate on it. But why is indecent exposure so traumatic for a woman? Because I think the failure to understand that, perhaps, explains both the failure for it to be properly pursued and prosecuted, and the failure of society to treat it with the seriousness that it so clearly deserves. So what is it about that moment that can be so traumatic? I got a couple of phone lines free still, but Miss Jar is around the corner, so do be quick if you think you can help. Annie's in Ilford. Annie, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Yes.
Annie.
Yeah, hi there. It happened to me last summer as quite an old lady, 69-year-old.
That's not old.
Out simply walking the dog along a local footpath in Ilford. I use every day. Guy jumped out from the bushes. It was hot weather. He'd on shorts and vest, and the shorts were down at his knees.
Oh,
he
Lord.
was masturbating in front of me, and I was totally shocked.
Was this the first time anything like that had happened to you?
It had happened to me once about 40 years previously.
Right.
But it was this. For a second, you feel absolute fear.
Right.
And that's the huge response,
Yeah.
I think everybody. And after that came absolute anger. As an ex-retired teacher and everything.
Yes.
I felt he could be doing this to children. And I just shouted at him, swore at them, told my dog to go and kill him. But, of course, my dog's a big softie, so he would never have done that. And then after a minute, I thought, should I phone the police?
Yeah.
Is this serious enough? And I thought, yeah, it should be. So I phoned 999, got through to the police, gave them a very good description.
Oh, I think we lost the phone line. Oh no, you've just come back. Go on. What did they do? The 999 operator?
They just asked for a description and said we'll get someone to have a look. They said they'd had a look. They phoned me back later. 2 days later, I got a phone call from the police station, a sort of follow-up. Can you give us a description again? Not once was asked, how was I feeling or how did it affect me?
Yeah.
It seemed like they were ticking boxes, The the Safer Neighbourhood team got in touch with me and, again, it was all practical things. Oh, we must improve the footpath. We must...
As opposed to getting men to stop behaviour.
I was thinking... Yeah.
Where do you think... Where do you think this failure of society at large to take it sufficiently seriously? I mean, because we're being told today it must be taken more seriously because it might lead to something else. I haven't read the report, so I hope I'm not misrepresenting it. But in a sense, that's not entirely helpful either, is it? Because that fails to recognise how horrible it is and of itself, even without being part of an escalation. But both points stand. Why do you think that we have such a strange attitude towards it?
It's against women.
Yes.
And because of the way it's been portrayed in the media, as you say, postcards, comedy shows, the old guy in the Mac. This is a young guy, 25, no older than that.
Right.
So there isn't a stereotype for this. And it seems to be stereotyped in the media.
And when you told people what had happened to you, among your female friends in particular, what was the response? A sort of, gosh, yes, you as well, or were people shocked?
No, I was shocked by their response.
Go on.
They made a joke of it.
Oh.
It was like, ha, ha, did you get a good look, all that sort of thing,
Yes.
There's sort of this as you say, seaside postcard type response. And I said to them, I'm shocked by the way you've actually responded to this, because it's really affected me, you know.
And what did they say?
And they said, oh, well, yes, we never really thought. We thought we'd just try and cheer you up about it.
Yeah, well, I think that...
Make a joke of it.
Yes, I understand that psychologically. There's two things going on. They're trying to minimise your trauma and also perhaps trying to protect themselves from trauma as well in the event of something happening to you. You can really convince yourself it's not a big deal, in other words, which is... something that pops up in therapy an awful lot, because it's a very, very bad and unhealthy thing to do, to convince yourself that something bad wasn't bad, because it kind of festers then and it can grow inside you. But you're not under any illusions at all about how unpleasant the experience was for you. Thank you, Annie. I'm sorry you were in a position to contribute to today's programme in that way. I really am. But I'm grateful to you for doing so. 11:57 is the time. No prizes for this. 600 was the answer to that question. GBBs has paid Conservative MPs 600 times more than Labour MPs in the same period for appearances on screen. But remember, they are scrupulously impartial according to Ofcom, or they're not a news channel according to, I don't know. It's just gone 11:57. Mystery hour around the corner. We have one more call, I think, from Francesca, who's in Nottingham. Francesca, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
My story goes back to the early 80s, and I worked for the local authority in Parks and Gardens, and I was in a minority female at the time. It was all a male environment. Part of my job was to work in wooded areas and in the parks and do gardening. One particular day, doing what I normally did, and a guy jumped out from behind a tree and ejaculated in front of me. I was young at the time, and it was really quite shocking.
I'm sorry.
I went to the people I worked with, my bosses, explained it, and they found it jovial. They were laughing as if it was something I should have.
Are you serious? Even something as grim and graphic as that gets the same?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sorry.
It was humorous, I haven't thought about this for years.
Okay.
But hearing the conversation today, it came back to my mind.
Of course.
And the police were called, and part of the investigation was they had to take me back to the area where it happened and show them and explain, which was really quite horrible.
Yes.
And the comments from the female police officer at the time was, "Are you sure that's what you saw? You're very young." Now, I was married very young, so I was well aware of what I had seen.
Yeah. What an odd... I don't know quite what she was playing at. Do you? Where would that...
Not really.
Oh.
It was as if I had misseen, or I was young and didn't know what that process was or what men did.
Yes, yes. I see. So, there may have been a naivety. She may have been accusing you of naivety rather than dishonesty, perhaps.
Yes. Okay. Definitely.
And I'm going to presume, given the calls that we've already taken on this, that nothing followed. Nothing else was ever done by the police. And would it have made you less likely to report it if it happened again?
No, I think I would. I would, because I think it matters that whether anything happens or not, that it's recorded, that there is an awareness, because with people saying they don't report it, we actually really don't know how many times it's happening. It could be no more than we're seeing, but it could be a lot more. And I think people owe it to themselves as well, because once you have reported it, you kind of hand it on a little bit. You don't carry all the responsibility with you.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. So it's good for you as well as good for society more generally. To move it on. I'm sorry. That's awful. The idea of a police. Well, first of all, your colleague's not taking you seriously, and then the police officer sort of adding to the problem. Francesca, do take care. It's just gone 12 o'clock. I'm going to share with you two stories that I've had to double check, because given the day upon which we're having this conversation and the reasons why we're having it, I couldn't quite believe that these two stories had both broken on the same morning. All right? And make of them what you will. The first is the news from approximately 20 minutes ago that the father of the boy who murdered Brianna Ghey has just been jailed for 15 months after admitting 2 counts of exposure and 1 count of taking an indecent photo of a child. He's the father of 16-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe, who you remember was jailed for at least 20 years last month after for the murder of Brianna Ghey. And then the other story, which in many ways is as shocking, although for completely different reasons, is being picked up by Politico. Esther Webber, their senior UK correspondent, reports this morning that the government is pulling a vote on banning MPs accused of violent and sexual offences from Parliament. It was due on Monday, but Tory backbenchers, including Christopher Chope and Philip Davis, writes Esther Webber, are putting up a fight. Accusations do not involve or impute guilt. Of course they don't. So it may be a little bit more nuanced than it originally appears. But of course, if you'd been accused of it and then found that there was no case to answer, there would be nothing to stop you returning to your attempt to get into Parliament. Extraordinary, really, that those two stories both broke this morning. It is 2 minutes past 12.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes after 12 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Don't let me go home today without telling you about the play I saw last night. I don't know that I've ever wanted to recommend a play as highly as the one that I had the pleasure of seeing last night. But before all of that, Mystery Hour is upon us, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. And if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty straightforward. You can only ring in, by the way. Keith's worried that people need reminding, because I haven't told you for a couple of years, and a lot of people have now started complaining that I'm not reading their texts. We are once again victims of our own popularity. I do not respond to texts, except in the most extraordinary and unprecedented of circumstances in which you almost certainly do not currently find yourself. If you were on the moon and you couldn't ring in but you could text, I might make an exception. Actually, that's silly. A space station would be fine. That would be fine as well. Someone rings in, asks a question. It could be you. Someone else rings in and answers it. That's pretty much it. Do you know, I'd like to start a new feature on people who sent me texts accidentally. Because I don't know why. You would have thought, wouldn't you, that if the number was 84850 for a text, or now that you can WhatsApp me, it's still 0345 6060973. So it's not a normal phone number. It's not like an 0779 whatever normal phone numbers are. So I've never fully understood. I presume it's because you've got me saved in your phone, is it? You've got LBC saved in your phone and you accidentally send it to the wrong destination rather than that you've accidentally punched in the wrong number. But I should start looking out for them because they just make me smile so much. Someone called Sanders has been in touch to ask, hey, how are you doing today? At what time are you free? Well, I'm doing fine, Sanders. 1 o'clock usually, but I've got a podcast today at 2. But thanks for asking. I just read them out and then answer them literally. Could you pick up some bacon because I've got to go to the dentist's? Yeah, that's sure. What do you want? Smoked or unsmoked? Back or streaky? I'll see what I can do. And also, good luck at the dentist. What time's your appointment? 2:30. Ba-boom tish. You can win a prize, not for jokes like that, obviously, but for being my favourite contribution of the day. You can win a Mystery Hour board game. I literally, this is such a popular radio feature. It has spawned an extremely popular board game, which is great fun. And yours for the price of a quality contribution, a top quality contribution, or for the price of about 20 quid if you want to head over to mysteryhour.co.uk. This is a proper competition and therefore governed by proper rules. And therefore I can refer you to lbc.co.uk where the full terms and conditions are available. Should we crack on? I think that's covered almost everything. Let's just start at the beginning. Dominic is in Bispham in Lancashire. Dominic, question or answer?
It's a question, James. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise. What have you got?
And before I do ask the question, I just say I've only been listening to you from May, but I've listened to 150 episodes on your podcast non-stop.
Since May?
Since May just gone.
That's fantastic.
I've only got 50 episodes left, so I'm plowing through.
No, there's 500. This is a very pregnant pause. Dominic, are you still there? Oh, he's actually not. Your phone cut out. Oh God, that was almost. Was that you, Keith, or was that genuinely the gremlins in the system? No, your phone cut out at literally the point of me asking. I'm sure there's 500, isn't there?
Yeah, there is 500. I've only got 50 left to listen to.
So you've watched 450?
Yeah, I've listened to 450 episodes.
Watched, I bet, yeah. I misheard you. I thought you said 100. That's an extraordinary achievement. I'm going to give you a round of applause right now.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. If I had gold clocks, I'd give you one. Question or answer, Dominic?
It is a question.
And you can be fairly confident that we haven't asked it before, or at least not in the first 450 episodes of Mystery Hour.
Well, when I stop listening, I'm going to be like Wayne in Basildon, but instead I'm going to be Dom the Mystery Hour listener.
Go on then. What have we got?
So pretty much we have rainy days, we have windy days.
Yeah.
When do they become a storm? Because over the winter we went through storms like we were reading through a baby book.
We did. You mean all the different names?
Yeah. It was just a storm left, right and centre. But like we have normal windy, rainy days. But when does that actually become a storm?
What's the threshold for a storm? I mean, it's going to be a measure, isn't it, of how strong the wind is or something like that, I imagine. But I don't know what it would be.
Not possible, because it put me quite out of work, a fair bit.
No, you're. What do you mean? Put them. Yeah, no, it wouldn't, would it? So we'll find out for you. What is the threshold that needs to be crossed for a rainy day or a windy day to become an actual storm? And you see it. You're right on the weather map. So there must be a way of doing it. Pressure, wind speed. I like that question, Dom. Well done. I can tell that you've done your homework. 450 hours of it, which is to be encouraged. Maureen's been in touch. She says, "Can you get me some bacon, please, James?" No. Maureen is the answer to that. Get your own. Sam's in Oxford. Sam, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
Why was Napoleon known by his first name, whereas most of the other crazy dictators in history are all known by their second name?
I don't want to get into a. Does Napoleon qualify as a crazy dictator?
Well, you know, I was thinking about another phrase to use, and there were many that came to mind.
What about Queen Victoria?
Sure, but I mean people who are most known for bad things, should we say?
Well, depending on where you go in the world, mate.
Of course.
Napoleon in France, I don't think is considered to be mostly responsible for bad things, is he?
I don't know. I can't say I'm not a Frenchman.
No, but I'm going to go out on a limb. The fact that they came back a couple of years later with another Napoleon and tried to have another empire suggests that he was quite fondly remembered, even though he got himself into a little bit of hot water towards the end of his life. But is it true? I mean, who are the ones that you're thinking of?
Well, I mean, you know, if you go Hitler and you're Stalin, that kind of thing, it's always someone's surname. And why is it someone's first name?
Well, two reasons, two answers. I don't think it is. I think that if you're an emperor, then they go with your Christian name, don't they?
Yeah.
Emperor Nero.
I thought that was my inkling, but I wasn't sure.
Emperor Napoleon, Queen Victoria. So if you've got a title before your name, other than Führer, then they go with your first name. It's Tsar Nicholas.
Like a royal.
Tsar, he was. He achieved royal status by becoming emperor. So I
you may have answered it for me.
I think that is the answer. The first name goes with the honorific, and neither
Does that mean you can
Stalin.
Give yourself a round of applause?
I do every day, Sam, metaphorically, but at least today I can do it literally. But you've opened a can of worms, haven't you? Because I presume that French people do look back upon Napoleon with a sort of sense of imperial pride akin to the way that a lot of British people look back upon our 19th century exploits. But I don't know. Anyway, the bottom line is I get a round of applause. Thank you, Sam. Early doors. I'm working it out live on air, which is always a particular pleasure. Well, I don't know what a soft G is, Jake. It's a J, is it? And a G is a hard G, is it? So it's Jev in Hove, not Gev. Hello, Jev.
It's Jed.
It's what?
Jed.
It's Jed.
Jed.
It's not even Jev. It's Jed with a D.
I've been called far worse. So
so have I, but they've written Jev and then they've put in brackets soft G on the screen. That's the first time I've ever had pronunciation notes for an incorrectly spelt name.
No problem at all.
Question or answer, Jed?
Question, please.
Carry on.
Why do racehorses have such strange names?
It's not just racehorses, Jed.
Horses in general?
No, not horses in general, but that, in a sense, is the answer to your question. Because horses in general don't have strange names. You could call a horse Dobbin. But what are the odds on you meeting another Dobbin when you were out for a ride?
True.
Did you just provide your own sound effect then? That was extraordinary.
Maybe.
That sounded brilliant. So because I have a pedigree. I've got a pedigree dog. That's it. And when I was a kid, we had a pedigree cat, and they've got bonkers names. They've got like 4 names. Can you work out what the answer is yet?
Yeah, I kind of understand it, but when there's gambling involved and it's such a big organised
lineage,
thing,
you've got to prove the lineage. So you can't have a dog called Spot. The dog has to have a name, I think, recognised by the Kennel Club, that is specific to that dog, so that you can actually, because you pay a premium for a puppy sired by that dog in the same way that you pay a premium for a foal sired by that stallion or birthed by that mare. So the reason why they have to have increasingly complicated or esoteric names is simply for the exclusivity that they provide, the descriptive exclusivity.
Sounds good to me.
I'm on fire today, mate, aren't I? Apart from getting your name wrong, despite having pronunciation notes on the screen in front of me. That's another round of applause for me. I'll tell you what would be funny. Hey, Jed, come here.
Go on.
Do you know what would be funny, mate?
Go on.
Because you know how this is about horses, yeah?
Yeah.
Steward's inquiry on this one.
I think so.
Yeah, 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. What's the criteria, the threshold for a storm? When does a windy day or a rainy day, or indeed a rainy, windy day, become a storm? Does it need thunder, perhaps, or lightning? Is it very, very frightening? I've answered the other 2 questions in my characteristically arrogant fashion, but there is always room for a steward's inquiry, particularly on Jed's question. He'll always be Ged to me. Jed's question about... You're Ged to me. Jed's question about the curious, apparently eccentric names for horses. I'm sure that my answer is correct, but there may, of course, be more to it. There may be other elements as to why they have such complicated and exciting and eccentric-sounding names. Beatrice is in York. Beatrice, question or answer?
Hello, it's a question.
Yes.
So it's dog related because I love dogs. So you can get whistles for dogs when you're training them.
Yes, I believe they're called dog whistles.
Well, if 2 people that don't know each other are walking their dogs on a big field and they've got the same whistle from the same shop, how does the dog know if the person blows the whistle at different ends of wherever they are? How does the dog know which person to go to?
I don't think it does.
It does, because they go to them.
Yeah, but you can't hear it, so how do you know it's making the same noise?
Because if you blow if you blow 2 different whistles, or if somebody that's with you blows the 2 different whistles,
I don't know the answer, but because by channeling Sherlock Holmes, you've got 2 dog owners with 2 whistles, both blowing their whistle, and the dogs, and I'm taking your word for this, Beatrice, the dogs both make their way then to their own owner in response to the whistle. Then there is only one explanation for how that could be, and that is that the whistles are, from the dog's point of view, making different noises. There can't be another explanation. There literally can't be. The more confident I get at moments like this, Beatrice, the more humiliated I am 10 or 15 minutes later.
So then how does the person making the whistle make so many different sounds?
I don't know that it does. I don't know that it does. I think the whistles might be ever so slightly differently calibrated.
Oh, okay.
Or you might puff differently, and the dog's hearing is so finely tuned that if we both blew into a tube, we would have a different strength of blowing, wouldn't we? So it may be linked to that, but I cannot see how the answer to your question can be anything other than the dogs are hearing different tones.
Okay.
But you don't sound very happy, Beatrice, frankly, with my answer. You sound perfectly happy existentially, but you're not very satisfied, are you, with my answer?
No.
I would like to know the answer from a professional.
Oh, thanks very much. What do you think I am? Chopped liver? I said yes. All right. Well, all right. If I had to put a bet on it, I'd say it's probably the different puff, the personal puff,
right?
The principle of personal puff, Beatrice. But I'm not going to take a round of applause for that one. Partly because you're clearly so unsatisfied with my answer, and you want a professional, and partly because I've already got two, and nobody likes a greedy guts. Thank you. I shall try and find out for you. Why do two dogs know whose owner is blowing, even though the owners have got the same whistles? 0345 6060 973. Graham's in Woking. Graham, question or answer?
I've got a question.
Carry on.
It's also to do with high pitch, actually.
Oh.
I have tinnitus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's really frustrating. That's right.
I bet it is.
It does my head in.
Yeah.
But if I press a part of my head with different pressure, and then a different part of my head with different pressure, the pitch of the tinnitus will adjust. It will go higher or lower. It will muffle slightly. Never goes away. But I want to know why, if I press my head hard, say around the crown, for example, the pitch will change. But why?
Well, this is an esoteric inquiry, isn't it? By all accounts. I mean, would it just not be the same? I mean, I don't know how tinnitus works, but
it's nothing to do with puff.
No, I know it's nothing. Well, it depends, doesn't it? How much you've had, but the ringing in your ears. The ringing is. Are you not just describing your head as a bell? And if you put some pressure on the bell, then the tone of the chime will change. Is it? I think it's probably just that, isn't it?
No. I don't know
what
why.
What do you mean, no? Don't be so dismissive.
Yeah, I'm a bit like Beatrice. I think
I'm surrounded by a lack of satisfaction today.
It just, I don't think my head's like a bell in so much as it's not ringing, it's just the high pitched beep noise.
No, all right. Well, I mean, we'd probably need a tinnitus expert rather than anything else, don't you? Your ear, it's got to be linked to your ear. Well, listen, I don't know why I'm trying to answer it, Graham. Let me leave it on the board. I'll see what I can do. I'm sorry for your trouble, though. Must be a right old pain in the proverbials, that.
It is, actually. It does do my head in. And sometimes you don't notice it, and then another day you're like, oh, man.
Yeah, and then as soon as you do, you can't unnotice it, I imagine, can you? That's the really annoying thing.
And then when you think it's gone, you start listening for it. It's like, is it gone? Oh, there it is.
And then you say, why did I listen for it? Why did I have done it again? I've done it again. You're on, okay?
Cool. Thanks, James.
You're very welcome. It is 25 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why does James, this is a question from Sue, and I don't take questions by text, but this one caught my eye. Why does James tie us all up in knots with political debates when a good old-fashioned anecdote about his River Island underpants gives us all a good laugh? This is a real question. I can't do 3 hours a day of anecdotes about my underpants, Sue. Well, thank you, Keith. It's possible I could, but they'd get progressively worse, as underpants are wont to do. Kieran's in Dublin. Kieran, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on.
So, James, you're running a couple of commercials on the station there at the moment. One, I think, is either for McDonald's or Kentucky, and another one.
Be careful. These pay you're not going to be rude, are you? These pay my mortgage. No. All right, carry on then.
So I'm just wondering. Are these people who are on the ads, who are voicing the ads, like, your man who does the vintage cash cow ad, does he actually speak like that, or are these putting voices on for the ads?
I know this because I've got a newish mate called Gav. He's a big mate of Chris Moyles's, and he does a very, very famous voice in a very, very famous advert. I don't want to say what it is because I haven't cleared it with him, but he categorically doesn't speak like that in real life. You knew that, though. You're talking about a really exaggerated voice.
No, I didn't. But I'll tell you, I could make it actually a stack of money, James. You know your board game at the moment?
Yeah.
You could bring out a second board game saying, what would James say? Because some of the answers you come up with when you're making them up, I'd be thinking to myself, does he actually believe that himself, or is he just making it up?
Well, funnily enough, that is kind of already built into the game, Kieran.
All right.
Because what you have on the card, you have the right answer, you have the wrong answer, and then you have a space into which you can put your own made-up answer. So you could...
Yeah, but your own made-up answers couldn't be half as good as some of the ones you'd be coming up with.
Yeah, but then you never... But you don't... If it's what would James say, you prune. You've got to make it up yourself, haven't you? You're not going to be able to read my mind.
Guess your own. You have to guess what you've said, because it's probably the most.
All right, I'll take that back. You're not a prune. You're not a prune. You mean here's which of these was James's invented answer?
Yes. And it's probably the most weirdest one out there.
There is a slight... Well, actually, I think you'll find most of my answers are correct, Kieran. Thank you very much. But there is a slight problem. Because what I'm trying to do, Kieran, is obviously my plans for world domination involve marketing the game to people who've got no idea who I am, you see. So that wouldn't work at all.
Right.
That wouldn't work at all. No one plays Monopoly, do they? Because they know the fella that invented it. They look, I want to rule the world, Kieran. I want Miss Jia to be played in Ulaanbaatar and Timbuktu. I don't just want it to be confined to people who've had the pleasure of tuning into the programme every week.
All right. Well, you say the last thing. Give yourself a handshake, a hand clap.
Careful. I will, actually, because apparently Chris always mentions it on air, and it is Gav, and it is the Cocoa Pops monkey, so I'll take that as a round of applause. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm on a roll today, 3 for 3. It's coming up, 12:28 is the time, at least one more before the news. Simon's in Bournemouth. Simon, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
Love the show.
Thank you.
It's about the horse racing question.
Are we having a steward's inquiry on the horse racing question?
We are a little.
Get in! Yes! Carry on. I've never been so happy to have a steward's inquiry on one of my own answers before. I love it. Carry on.
So when horses are foaled, they're unnamed. And
Yes.
and then the owner of the foal gets to choose a name for the horse.
Yes.
And they are allowed 18 characters. They quite often do a fancy play on something to do with the sire and the mare, in other words, mum and dad, and then they create the name and they check it with the British Horse Racing Authority to check that it doesn't exist, because it can't exist as a name of a live racehorse.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And there are certain things that you can't put into the name, certain rude things, and then things like colt and filly and things like that. And you're not allowed a number, but you can spell out a number. So if you're a golfer, you can have 3 under through 5. But
what do you think I got wrong then?
Well, I'm not sure.
No, you've just given more. You've given more detail, haven't you, on the
I have.
on the answer. But the part of the rationale for not being able to use a name that's already in use isn't just to avoid duplication, but it's also to provide lineage, so you can prove lineage.
So, well, it could be.
Well, it has to be.
Yes.
Otherwise, you call your horse Red Rum, and then you could sell the foals for millions. Couldn't you?
Yeah, it could do.
There we go. I'm going to give you a round of applause, but I don't think your steward's inquiry was successful, because I think my answer stands. But I'm feeling kind. I'm feeling kind, and I've got applause coming out my ears. 12:30 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Tom Harrigan is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
You know, if I had £1 for everyone who's texted me since 12 o'clock today saying, "Hi James, I'm texting you from the International Space Station," I'd have at least £17. Chef Alex from London is helping to explain the dog whistle question, but I cannot. See, Keith was right. I tend not to look at the inbox during Miss Jia, but Keith keeps an eye on things. Very concerned that we need to reiterate the message that we don't accept contributions via text or tweet or WhatsApp, which you can now use to get in touch with the programme, although I'll ignore it between 12 o'clock and 1. Well, I won't necessarily ignore it, but there's a much lower chance of me noting it than there would be the rest of the week. But the WhatsApp number is the same as the phone number. Jennifer's in Torquay. Jennifer, question or answer?
Hi, James.
Hello,
it's
Jennifer.
a question,
Carry
please.
on. Carry on.
Okay. Is it ever too cold to snow?
Not in Torquay, Jennifer. Not on the English Riviera. Not a chance. I know this, and I think I know this because it's come up before. And I think the answer is technically no. It is never too cold to snow, but it is more likely once you get very cold, like minus, 9 or 10 degrees, that there wouldn't be enough moisture in the air to create snow.
Right. Okay.
That's your answer.
Right.
It's not as much fun when I do it, is it?
know.
It's not. It wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have stayed around for the best part of 20 years. I did used to answer loads of questions, and then I just lost the ability to do so. But oddly, today the planets have aligned, Jennifer, and I find myself qualified to answer an unfeasible number of this week's questions.
Oh, that's okay. I don't mind.
Thank you. And there may yet be a steward's inquiry, and you are, of course, still in with a chance of. In fact, the more I answer, the greater your chance of winning a Mystery Hour board game is, because I can hardly award it to myself, can I?
No, well, that'd be good.
We shall see. Thank you. I'm pretty sure that's correct, and I'm pretty sure that it has popped up on the programme before, but as ever, if I'm wrong, you know what to do. Another round of applause for me, please, Keith. How many is that today? 3 or 4? 3, not 4. Did I not? I got the... It's 4, blimey. I wonder what the record is. John's in Birmingham. John, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, John.
With regard to the question about the dog whistles and how they know to respond to which whistle.
Yeah, it was a lovely question, actually.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
The first thing to say about it is that all dog whistles are manufactured to a very tight tolerance, so they produce a consistent sound.
Yes.
When you were training your dog, you would typically train your dog to respond to specific commands. So it might be 2 pips on the whistle for stop.
So you'd have a style of whistle. So, yeah, okay. But yeah, okay.
And you might have 3 pips for recall, for example. But inevitably, most dog trainers will tell you that your own personality will come into the way in which you blow the whistle.
Yes.
So your dog will start to instinctively know that it is your whistle that they are responding to.
So it is the relationship between the whistle and the blower.
Exactly. The only exception to that might be that if you were really specific about it, you can get a whistle. You might have heard of the silent dog whistle.
Yes.
Which isn't actually truly silent. That's got a little screw piston on the side that you can actually tune to your dog's ear, so you can tune the frequency to your dog's ear if you wish.
Well, I never. That's your top of the range dog whistle.
Yeah, that is a dog whistle that is a very nice
bit of kit.
Solid silver dog whistle. Yeah, nice bit of kit.
Qualifications?
I am the archivist at the Acme Whistle Company in Birmingham, who have been making the majority of the world's dog whistles since 1870.
You are kidding me?
Nope.
That is Hudson & Co.
Yeah, that's the one.
I've walked past it and I've thought, I wonder if they're still making whistles.
Yeah, they absolutely are. They make the most of the world's dog whistles, actually. Yeah.
And remind me whereabouts it is in Birmingham.
That is in the Hockley area of Birmingham.
Yeah. And you're not based at the factory, obviously.
I work sort of...
So what have I walked past?
You've walked past the factory, a very old... Well, it's not Victorian. It's built in 1909, that factory.
Yeah, and it looks like it.
Yeah, and behind those walls, you'll see Acme Thunder has been made, the sports whistles, and the millions of dog whistles being made.
That is, wow, how many dog whistles? I mean, that's not your only job, is it? Dog whistle archivist?
It's not my only job, actually, no, but that's a role that I fulfil for them, yeah.
That's got to be at Ray Liotta, hasn't it? I mean, Acme don't just make dog whistles, do they?
No, they don't just make dog whistles. They make sports whistles. You'll have heard of the Acme Thunder, or probably
for referees
use.
And you're the archivist for the whole of the whistle world.
Yes, yeah.
How'd you get into that?
Like most things in life, I suppose, James, a bit of serendipity. Yeah.
And how long have you been doing it?
It's coming up to, I think, 4 years. I studied history at university and then got into it that way. It's one of those things. Yeah.
And when do you think you're going to call it full time? I'm so sorry. Do you want a round of applause?
Oh, I'd love a round of applause.
You can whistle for it. Boom, boom. I think you get more than a round of applause. What an extraordinary. I mean, were you writing something, or are you just keeping records for the permanently, or? That's a lovely job. What a fascinating one.
There's whistles dating back to the 1870s that have been catalogued and archived.
Look at
all the way through to the present day. And then there's also loads of sort of documentary work that we're doing to catalogue the company's history, I suppose.
Absolutely. And we're going to have FA Cup finals coming out of our ears, are we, and stuff like that?
There's all sorts, and there's a whistle from 1966, there's a whistle from 1970, the Mexico World Cup.
Is there a museum in the factory? Is there a little museum in the factory, or not?
There isn't a museum as such, but there are regular tours that are held there.
Oh, hello! Sign me up for one of those. Oh well, and do you hold them? Do you hold the tours?
The tours are held by the managing director, is a guy called Simon Topman, who is very good at, very knowledgeable about the company's history.
This is one of my favourites ever. Have one of these for me.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it,
unbelievable. Thank you.
They will come. They will come. Absolutely first class, and lots of you sharing this is my favourite taste. This is absolutely priceless. What a great LBC community we have built together. You're not wrong. 12:41 is the time. Richard is in Addleston. Richard, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
Okay. So I take my kids swimming most weekends.
Yes.
I wear glasses. I've got terrible eyesight, so I take them off when we go in the pool. Now, it's blurry when I've got my head above water, but also underwater, which I think is quite standard.
Yeah.
I said to my daughter the other day, take your goggles off, because she's an avid wearer of them. I said, because in an emergency, you wouldn't have them with you, so practice without them like I used to do at school.
Top dadding.
Yeah. So I put her glasses on just out of interest, goggles, sorry. Yeah. And I went underwater and I could see everything, extremely clearly, which I found quite baffling. I could see all the way to the end of the pool, which is about 40 metres. All the tiles, all the grouting, everything, legs, whatever. I could just see clear as a bell as if I'd put my glasses on. And I was baffled because these are just sort of perspex goggles that you buy in the foyer with no prescription in them at all. And yet I could see as well as I can normally with my glasses. I just wondered what was at play,
I know this.
Something scientific, obviously. Do you?
I know this. It's not scientific, actually.
Oh, okay. Go on then.
It's because the rain has gone.
Right?
It's because the rain has gone.
The rain has gone. Yeah. Oh, I can see. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Rick. No, mate, I'm sorry. I think that I was on a bit of a roll with the whistle-based gags. And when you said, why can I see clearly now? I couldn't. Yeah, it's because the rain has. I mean, it's obviously not because the rain has gone, is it? And it is actually a really interesting question, and we will hopefully find out an answer for you.
Brilliant.
But there's not a lot you can do with that knowledge, though, is there? Because it doesn't work once you come out of the pool.
No, it doesn't. That's what baffles me.
Yeah, it baffles me now as well.
Putting on essentially toy goggles.
Something weird
happening. Something like might lose my eyesight by about 1,000%.
That's right. Absolutely extraordinary.
Underwater.
Yeah. All right. Why do Richard's eyes start working better when he's wearing non-prescription goggles underwater, but in no other circumstances is a similar improvement affected? So we've got the goggles. Beautiful answer to the whistle question. We've got the tinnitus. Graham wants to know why the tones of his tinnitus change according to him applying pressure to his head. I kind of did the snow, done the horses' names, done the Napoleon, and when does a windy day or a rainy day become an actual storm? I think that's pretty much it. Have I missed anything off? See, I've been this is probably not a good idea for me to answer these questions myself, is it? Because it kind of changes the whole dynamic of the show, and we need to get more questions up there. Not a lot of love out there for my jokes. Niall says, you are being truly pathetic today. Well, but then someone else texted, you are on brilliant form today. I know which one I agree with. Leshmi's in Cardiff. Leshmi, question or answer?
Answer to your tinnitus one.
Carry on.
So the reason you get tinnitus is because your auditory nerve in the inner ear is irritated for whatever reason, and it can produce sounds. If you press different sort of areas of the head, so like, around ears, which is soft tissue,
yes,
you might change or irritate the conduction will go through to the auditory nerve and maybe irritate it in a different way. So you might change the tone of it. Whereas if you put your hand on your forehead, it's mostly bone, that probably wouldn't kind of change the tone of the tinnitus. So it depends how well the conduction, wherever you've pressed, how much it further presses on the auditory nerve, and therefore the tone.
Okay, I think that follows. Qualifications?
I'm a GP.
Has it got anything to do with the liquid in the inner ear?
Yeah, so once you kind of. So once you go past the tympanic membrane, it's all liquid, and you've got like your little bones, and you've got your semicircular canals, and then you've got your auditory thing. So it does get conducted more easily behind the tympanic membrane than in front of it, because obviously it's air versus fluid. So it depends sort of how hard you press and how much the conduction sort of goes to the auditory nerve and annoys the auditory nerve.
That's a pretty comprehensive answer. Let me have a round of applause on me.
Thank you.
I'll cross that one off as well. We've got time for a couple more questions as well. 12:45 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Mystery Hour will continue after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So, two questions that still need answers include the threshold for a storm. When does rubbish weather, when does bad weather actually become a storm? I'd have thought that was quite easy to answer. 0345 6060 973. And when Richard was swimming the other day, he has very bad eyesight. And yet, when he borrowed his daughter's goggles and went underwater, he could see clearly. I thought that was a brilliant joke. I thought it was one of the best jokes ever, because it's all about the moment, isn't it? It's all about spotting. But the problem was I spotted the opportunity for the joke quite early, which means when I did the joke, it probably didn't have that little ring of authenticity that it would have had if I'd done it in the spur of the moment. But anyway, he could see clearly. Now the rain has gone. And because he had the goggles on, he could see clearly now with goggles on. Could see clearly now. He could see. And why? Why would goggles underwater have the same effect upon his eyesight as prescription spectacle lenses? Polly's in Camberley. Polly, question or answer?
Question, James.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wondered, how would our tides change if we had like 2 or 3 moons, like some other planets?
What?
Of different. The moon affects the tides. It sucks it in and out.
Well,
what
sort
if we
of.
had?
I mean, sort of. I don't.
Yeah. What if we had 2 or 3 moons at different distances and sizes? What would happen to the tides then?
Have you been at the wacky backy, Polly?
No, I'm serious.
Are you sure? That's the kind of question that my student friends used to ask at about 3 o'clock in the morning when they just got back from a petrol station with 8 pot noodles and a packet of minstrels.
I've just always wondered, because the moon causes a bulge, doesn't it?
What if we had like 3 moons, man?
Yeah, a serious question.
Is it?
Yes, because
Okay.
the moon causes a bulge and it brings the tides in and out. What if you had
multiple
moons?
multiple moons?
Yeah.
Multiple moons.
What would
All
happen to the tides? Yeah.
Okay, you're on. Yeah, I mean, we may have misunderstood the nature of moons and tides and the relationship, but I don't know what would happen if we had multiple moons. What would happen to the tides if we had multiple moons?
Yeah.
You're on.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Polly. There you go. Moons and tides and moons and tides. And Terry in Chester. Question or answer, Terry?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
I'm a big fan of yours. Pleasure to speak with you. Thank you. It's an answer to the question is, do voiceovers talk like voiceovers all of the time?
And you are a voiceover. I can already tell that you are a professional voiceover. Why? That is so interesting, isn't it? Anyway, so give us your answer first.
The answer is, we'd like to think not.
Yes.
But we are kind of vocal chameleons in many situations. So if we're just talking to family and friends, then probably not really, no.
But you have a very rich voice, don't you? You must be aware of that, because presumably at some point somewhere someone said, have you ever thought of getting into voiceover work? Or
yeah, that's very true. And, the natural tones help, and 20 years in a dark soundproof studio also help. So, I didn't start off necessarily like this, but over time it's naturally
like an actor. Your voice, the richness develops like a fine wine.
Very much.
And do you do other voices, or do you always just do your own voice?
No, quite a lot of different ones, actually. And, increasingly these days, regional accents are coming back into the fore. Once upon a time, it wasn't really seen as being a viable career unless you were a BBC.
So you put a list of accents you can do you, on your CV?
Rather than accents, because I think natural, it always wins out over performed, acted out accents. And I think, natural talent happens. But in terms of range and tone and that sort of thing.
Yeah? Well, it's acting, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
What are you proudest of?
Just recently done the new advertisements for Adele's tour in Munich. But that required a different kind of timbre, really. That was slower, more deliberate, and encouraging reaction, but without necessarily, Adele speaks for herself or sings for herself. It doesn't need necessarily me to be all.
You don't need to be attention grabbing, do you? On that? Yeah, no, I like that. Do you know Gavin, who does the Cocoa Pops monkey?
There are quite a few of us in a small social circle.
So you do know each other.
We'll know of each other, certainly.
Well, because I was going to introduce you, because Gavin's on the other line. Gavin, how are you, mate?
Hey, James, I'm good. Who's that? Sorry, I was on hold when he called through.
Isn't that nice? Look at this. It's like a little get-together for voiceover experts and voiceover superstars. Is there a lot of competition, Gavin? Do you sort of put pins of Terry in a little wax effigy at night because you really wanted that Adele gig?
No, there's so many of us. It's not. I mean, the scary thing is, for a conversation of the time, is everyone's against AI at the moment because a lot of voiceovers are being replaced by AI. So that's the biggest enemy at the moment, really, rather than ourselves.
But I suppose that is a worry because it just gets better and better, doesn't it, with the evolution? Because I would think they're never going to be able to match the authenticity or the richness or the reality of your voices, but I suppose we're all a little bit worried about where AI might go in the future. What are you proudest of, Gavin? Terry very cleverly just plugged his latest work. He kind of ducked the question a bit there. But
well, obviously, like you've said about the Cocoa Pops, or I could say about, introducing programs on BBC Three or the Olympics. That's or great, isn't it? A lot of the live work I've done, but obviously, because we're LBC Global, it's obviously the voices of implants. So that, of course, it's the big one. A career highlight by anybody's standards. I like this. I'll give you both a round of applause. I'll give you one each. All right, lads. Yay!
Is that all right, Terry? All right, take care.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, lads. 12:55 is the time. John is in Plymouth. John, question or answer?
James, it's an answer.
Carry on.
To do with the storms and storm naming. So the UK's National Weather Service, the Met Office, don't actually use thresholds. It's a scale, a risk matrix based on the likelihood and impact.
Oh, yes.
So what would constitute, say, you get a deep area of low pressure over Cornwall or the Welsh Mountains over the winter, wouldn't necessarily warrant a warning, but the same system at the same time of the year over London, over a populated area, could constitute a warning. So it's kind of, and then you've got the National Severe Weather Warning Service, which is based on yellow, amber or red weather warnings. The yellow one is to be aware. The amber is to be be prepared.
So there's quite a few variables. There's quite a few variables that are being crunched to get down to the question of whether you warn about the likelihood of it.
Yeah, and the chief forecaster will meet with civil contingency advisors around the country and discuss, local impacts and things like that. So it's a lot more complex than just thresholds.
You've got a lovely voice as well, actually, just by coincidence. What are your qualifications?
Well, I've worked on the Met Office weather desk for 9 years. So,
and does that involve doing broadcasts?
It doesn't, I'm afraid, no.
No, well, you could do. You should tell the boss. Tell him James O'Brien said you've got a perfect voice for radio. That's got to count for something. That's got to count for something. I presumably don't want to. But I don't know if you could ever replace Gavin as the Cocoa Pops monkey. I don't know where your career ambitions lie, but I think he's got that one sewn up for the foreseeable future. Round of applause for John, please. Lovely stuff. And I think this would be the last one, will it, if it's an answer? Simba's in Brighton. Simba, question or answer?
Hello, mate. I've got an answer for you.
Nice one. You've got a minute. Make it sing.
Okay, right. Firstly, I love you and what you do, so big ups and respect for everything. Yes, keep going. Secondly, you're on fire with your jokes, so don't let anyone put you down.
But I did say hurry up, I've only got a minute, and we've now had 40 seconds.
So the reason that he can see better with his goggles with the goggles underwater is twofold. One is basically the goggle. Water interacts with the cornea, so it blurs your vision. So having the airspace in the goggle gives your cornea the ability to focus clearly.
Right.
And secondly, water itself has a different refractive index to plastic or anything. So he's probably got a slight refractive error, which coincides with the index of the water, which allows him to see much clearer.
Sounds like a good answer. Qualifications?
I've been a domiciliary optometrist for 10 years.
That'll do nicely. Round of applause for Simba, please.
Yay!
Thank you to Gary for reminding me to do my Hook and Tease, which was King Lear at the Almeida Theatre in Islington. Is one of the finest productions I've ever seen, of any play ever. But I've also seen probably a dozen King Lears over the years, and this is just absolutely extraordinary. If you even just get I know it's London, I'm sorry, but it's just so beautiful, so absolutely extraordinary that I really cannot recommend it highly enough. Do we give the game to the whistle archivist, or do we usually decide that a Ray Liotta is reward enough? It is up to me, isn't it? Let's give it to him. Was it Gav? Who? John in Birmingham. John in Birmingham, because that was such a perfect moment, I think. for Mystery Hour fans. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, which is, of course, the official LBC app where you can pause and rewind live radio. You can listen back to all my jokes again and again and again. They probably get funnier like a fine cheese. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Strawberry with you at 4 o'clock. But now, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it is, of course, Sangeeta Maiska.
James O'Brien on LBC.